the need for consultation. And hence, after the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, who I would wish to thank from this floor for putting us in a position to be able to have this debate, after he opened the initial debate on the second reading, we agreed that this would go to a joint select committee of both houses to allow persons to come forward and make representations on what was in the legislation. I didn't sit on the committee, but I've read the report and I've heard from my colleagues, and it would appear that almost most of the major recommendations that were put before it we have accepted, and in some instances we have made changes. In other instances we have explained what the provisions in the particular bill were intended to do, such that there is some level of protection and understanding. I recognize, therefore, that there are very few things that will always have 100% consent. But on this matter, the government believes that we have been upright and upfront in our intentions, that we have done the widest possible consultation locally, regionally, and internationally, that after the bill we have also sought to have further consultation with the Barbadian public in public, and at this stage now, all that is left is for this Honourable Chamber to accept the report and the changes in the bill, and to allow the matter to move to the other place such that it may eventually receive the assent to become law. Then, the issue as to the institutional arrangements and the licenses and the fees and the opportunities will be given greater ventilation, and we will set about being able to ensure that this can lead not only to relief for many of our citizens, but also to economic benefits and jobs and investment for the people of this country. And as I said, in an inclusive manner, and not one that seeks to consolidate wealth where it has always been. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I ask that you note that I am supportive of this bill. I ask that you note also that I would wish to strongly commend and congratulate the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, but in addition, the other ministers as well who have worked assiduously with him, the Honourable Attorney General, the Honourable Minister of International Business, the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs, and of course, right next to him for the whole journey, the Honourable Minister of Health, the member for the City of Bridgetown. I believe, sir, that this will mark a moment for us at all kinds of levels with respect to our country economically, but also in terms of the decision to be able to claim our own identity, to establish our destiny, but to recognize that those things which have been part and parcel of what we have had in our history cannot be simply divorced or divided from us by reason of imperial legislation of which we had no part. If there are issues that we have to confront, then let us do so through our public education and through ensuring that where the risk of addiction as opposed to the utilization of medical cannabis, we'll deal with that when we get to recreational cannabis. But today, what we are dealing with is the medicinal cannabis and the opportunity to bring relief, create jobs, spur investment, and to be able to turn the corner in the chapter of our history that allows us to set our own destiny rather than to be determined by others. I'm obliged to you, sir. We'll close it now. No, Ronald has to speak.
Oh, is Ronald? Where's Ronald?
Our member Mr. Michael North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make a brief intervention in this matter, largely by the fact that nearly all of what I had intended to say has already been said, but I still believe I can add something to it. I support the bill before the Chamber, Mr. Speaker. legalizing medicinal marijuana and establishing a medicinal cannabis industry in Barbados. This, as has been said, should not jump out at anyone as a surprise, since it was put and reduced to writing in our manifesto. I speak today, Mr. Speaker, in my brief remarks, with no sentimentality. I have no romantic attachment to what is before this chamber. What I recognize is that a bill pursuant to our manifesto was presented to this chamber. It was deferred for full democratic participation elsewhere in the form of a subcommittee of cabinet. And after that democratic process was gone through, a report was coughed up, which is what we have pretty much before us today. All those who presented as part of that democratic process and consultation, they would know that everyone with their conflicting views, both views cannot be taken forward, but everything was evaluated, and we are where we are today. What is clear, Mr. Speaker, is that despite any subjective points of view, that the science speaks for itself. The science and the experts, Mr. Speaker, have determined that marijuana can be used for medicinal purposes. I, therefore, could not possibly fly in the face of that to disagree with it. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to support what is before us today, the legalizing of marijuana for medicinal use. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, that is far as I can say that I am comfortable with. That is my comfort zone, Mr. Speaker. And I certainly, I can make my views known from now. I know that there's going to be a consultative process, a referendum, perhaps even in relation to the use of marijuana for recreational purposes. And I can tell you from now, Mr. Speaker, that I will not be going there. It is a conscience thing that is acknowledged, and my conscience will not guide me to support that. I am not here, Mr. Speaker, to put it in crude language, to support people smoking weed. I am not here to support that. I am supporting, in a very clinical and surgical way, the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. I've heard all that it can do, and quite frankly, I believe that it can do the things that have been said that it can do. So I support that. One of the things, though, Mr. Speaker, that I must single out that has drawn me to support this is the fact that there's a recognition now that a lot of research is going to be undertaken. And that is like a magnet for me in terms of getting my support. I believe that we should engage fully to see, we may even be able to go further than what it is said that marijuana can now do. But we will only know that if we engage in research, proper research. And I want to go even further today, Mr. Speaker, to broaden this, because we are talking about stepping outside the box, stepping outside of the traditional approach to this. And I believe the time has come when we need to research a lot more than just marijuana. Now, I have a lot of time, Mr. Speaker, for what is commonly referred to as alternative medicine. In fact, I believe that perhaps marijuana itself can be grouped into that category of what is incorrectly called alternative medicine. Because really and truly, those other things were really here first. And what we get when we go into a doctor's office as an antibiotic or whatever, that is really modern medicine. The other stuff, the cerci and the garlic and the ginger and so on, to be used for healing and so on, those are the things that were around from way before. What we do now really is the alternative to that, which is the modern medicine. So I believe the time has come when this legislation should be seen as the springboard or the foundation for research to be carried on into the further properties and benefits of marijuana, but also at the same time, we need to go further and look at what the garlic, how these things can be analyzed and checked out with a scientific approach, objective, and an objective approach as to what these things can do. Now, just to be a bit anecdotal, I know someone who is doing medicine that I'm very close to. And every time I'm discussing with her and I talk about garlic and the things it can do, I know for a fact, in my case, Mr. Speaker, anytime I'm feeling the slightest hint of a cold coming on to me, I feel funny in any way, and I go and take 2 garlic capsules, and capsule is not the purest form of garlic, but you take 2 of them and everything disappears. Within a couple hours, you feel like a new man again. You can do things that you feel you can do 2 hours previously. Yeah, just 2 garlic capsules. So I know that these things have medicinal worth. But every time you say that to the the orthodox medical practitioner, they scoff at you and tell you, but you don't have any science for saying that garlic can do anything for you. Even vitamin C, I heard the doctor already tell me that vitamin C is foolishness. A doctor told me that already, that vitamin C is foolishness. You can believe that? And there's ginger. All these things can be properly researched, and those are just a few things that I am highlighting. But other things, we need to get to the bottom of a lot of these things, because I believe that the society is being done a disservice when we are not getting to the bottom of the benefits, health-wise, that these things can bring for us. So I feel we should see this, particularly the part in the legislation here that deals with research and licenses that will be issued for research, to make us think, as was said earlier, outside the box, and that we can in fact go to frontiers that we have not been going to before with an objective and open mind. If the scientists are going to approach it from the point of view that these things are foolishness, then we are not going to get anywhere. But if there can be objective scientific research, I believe that the world will be able to live in a world that will be, if not free, conditions health-wise would be a lot better for a lot more people. And one of the things I heard, and I mentioned to my colleague to my right, about marijuana, that palliatively it can ease your pain, but I hate to put it this crudely, but what you're really hearing is that it can ease your pain as you die. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that there's stuff out there, there are things out there, I don't want to say you will never die, but really that can perform the powers of healing and curing as opposed to treating. And that is what I feel we need to start to focus our medicinal research on, getting to the cures. And you know, Mr. Speaker, when I hear programs on the TV, and it is not, or the radio, and they're discussing health issues, and they're not mentioning the word cure, I turn it off right away. I was one night in my kitchen, and the TV was on. It was a Friday night, I think it was, and this TV program on CBC came on, and it had, so tonight we are going to be bringing, and they listed about a discussion with three doctors, and they were going to be discussing autoimmune diseases. And I turned it off right away because, Mr. Speaker, by the time they finished talking about that, I was bound to have one of them. When I hear what the symptoms are, I can know, well, I got one too, from how it's going to be put over. Those are not the things we should be listening to. We want to start to hear more conversations about the cures and healing people. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, I have a very spiritual approach to this. I feel you have it too, Mr. Speaker. I do not believe that God would have put man on earth defenseless. I feel the defenses are out there, but it is for man to find them. And I feel that the powerful minds that control science in this world have allowed themselves to become too blinkered and biased, and are failing to discharge their duties properly in relation to humanity when it comes to finding cures, Mr. Speaker. and I want to see a drift, a solid and quick move in that direction. So I believe I support fully the whole notion of what I have said is incorrectly called alternative medicine, because it was there first, and I believe that it can do wonders for us. Mr. Speaker, one other point that I will make is, as the Prime Minister said, the Honourable Prime Minister said, I also, as I said, I have no romantic attachment to this. For me, this is something that we need to do. I also see it from the point of view of business opportunities. And as the Prime Minister rightly said, right now, if we do not shape up, we're going to have to just ship out. Because I can tell you for a fact that in my role as Minister of International Business, I have made a couple visits to Canada, which was mentioned by the Prime Minister. And we have to start pussyfooting, because one of the things that Canada comes at you directly with is the status of where you are in terms of legalizing the issue of medicinal marijuana in Barbados. Now, from the time I was there, my first visit there was in November last year, and they said then that we were going to Parliament shortly. In March again, and when you go to these meetings intended to meet with A, B, and C, you get requests to also meet D, E, and F. And the main issue now in Canada in terms of Barbados is business products, is the issue of medicinal marijuana. That's a fact. Everywhere you go, when I went back again in March, that was the issue. And September again, where are you? There are companies that want to do business in Barbados, but they can't do it with the state of our legislation. Sometimes you hear the slightly veiled threat as well, that we currently have 2 companies in Barbados. But we also want to get involved in the medicinal marijuana industry. We want to make some investments there in that regard. And you hear a little veiled threat that they want a one-stop shop. So if you can't get that for us as a new venture, then the 2 companies we have, we might pull them out too. So there was on my last visit, there was an entity, the director of the CEO of a very big corporation up there, already has business in Barbados. They want to set up a captive and insurance company to insure the risks of companies that deal in marijuana, medicinal marijuana, in Canada. And they want to set up in Barbados, but they can't come to Barbados yet because it is not legit to do anything in relation that is tangential to the handling of marijuana. So all this is business that is being kept out there at bay because Barbados was pussyfooting. So we cannot continue just going and saying we will do it. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very cruel world out there, you know. Nobody really gives a damn about Barbados. That's a fact. There's some things that it is our fault that we find ourselves not having certain competitive advantages that we should have. Some things lie within our fault, that's a fact. When it takes too long to get a permit to do this or do that, or to register a company, all these things, yes, you can take some blame for that. But there's some things that are not, I'm not going to even refer to the comment of the Honourable Member Sir Michael West. I'm not going to refer to that, because it was already referred to there, and I don't want to think. But there's some things, Mr. Speaker, let's face it, there are some things that we are up against a lot out there in this world. You have, as I said, the ones that are homegrown, obstacles you put in your own way. Then you have a number of regulatory bodies out there who impose impossible requirement after impossible requirement upon you. As soon as you manage to jump one hurdle, they bring another thing at you again. You're just dodging bullets all the time. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to use every single thing that we can to gain a competitive advantage out there. The world is not waiting on us. the Prime Minister mentioned, and the member, the Minister of Health mentioned as well, other jurisdictions already in this region already have on their books medicinal marijuana legalized. What are we waiting on? What are we waiting on, Mr. Speaker? I am happy to see that we are where we are today for the reasons I've outlined. I think it is tremendous value to human beings, and I think it will be of tremendous value to our economy. The point was made as well that there are people, Barbadians, who work in Canada on farms dealing with production of cultivation of marijuana. Their funds are dead because the funds will be deemed to be from gains that are not legal operations according to the laws of Barbados. So what are they going to do with the money? All these are things we have to tighten up. So the law is here today. This is step A. After the Senate meets on this, it will become legal in Barbados for there to be a medicinal marijuana industry. But you have now, after that, to get the commercial banks on board. Because one of the meetings I had a few weeks ago in Canada was with an extremely wealthy Kenyan, extremely wealthy, who again wants to invest in Barbados, and this is big league stuff, Mr. Speaker. But he said, what is the position with what is your money laundering requirements? In fact, he knew already. He said, y'all got to deal with your anti-money laundering strictures. And he was referring specifically to the commercial banks. The commercial banks. Now, I was fascinated to hear the member for the city, honorable member, said that some communication was made by the recognition by the commercial banks that, in effect, that they are a stumbling block. It fascinated me to hear banks say that about themselves, because we know that they're the stumbling block. But the question, more importantly, Mr. Speaker, is what are they prepared to do about it? It is an idiotic statement to make yourself a stumbling block without deciding and saying, indicating what it is that you intend to do about it. So why is it that medicinal cannabis is totally legit in Canada? And you have in Barbados a number of Canadian banks. Now, why should it be a problem for you to bank money in a Canadian bank in Barbados when in Canada it is perfectly legit to have a medicinal marijuana industry? And if they want to say that ultimately it has to be sorted out in the United States, and there may be some validity in that comment as well, then there are the ones that have to get up and ensure that they use their might and their argument and their influence to assist us in getting to the point where you can have a totally integrated operation. We don't have phase part A. We have the legislation. The question that the Kenyan asked me was still obtained. So you have your legislation. I want to come to your country to establish whatever, that we're going to have to my money, the money that I earn from this industry. Am I going to be able to bank it in Barbados? So until the commercial banks recognize that there are not laws unto themselves, and Mr. Speaker, you know me, I'm tired talking about commercial banks in here. Tired talking about it. There's nothing more I can say now by way of criticism of commercial banks that will add to anything that I already said. So it will be futile and a worthless use of energy for me to repeat what I think of commercial banks and how they operate. But this is no big bucks at stake. So I believe that the time will come when there's going to have to be some political intervention in relation to what commercial banks are doing to this country, in this country, and to this country. We cannot be held to ransom. It is too much work and effort that not only me, but others of us who go out to sell a product, as we are now. We just made some wonderful changes to our tax structure and our whole international business regime. We're out there selling it, hard selling it, only to find that you take one step forward and then you got to take 2 steps backwards because, in this case, now, of commercial banks. That cannot happen, Mr. Speaker. It cannot be allowed to happen. Too much is at stake. The health of our nation is at stake. The health of our economy, Mr. Speaker, is also at stake. So I have no difficulty in supporting what was presented by the Honourable Member for the City, a very well-regulated marijuana industry. I think that there's no need to fear that anyone is being oppressed in it. You see the safeguards in relation to minors. So I am at ease in supporting the introduction and use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. I repeat that is my comfort zone. I repeat that is my comfort zone. Well, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I am obliged to you.
Honourable Mr. Michael West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm afraid I should let you know that I might be a while. You could aid me, though, Mr. Speaker, if you would protect me from the Honourable Member of St. Peter and the Honourable Member of St. James North. Without their interruptions, without their anticipated interruptions, Mr. Speaker, I should be through much sooner than I project. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to start by making reference to the presentation of the Honourable Member of St. James North, the Minister of Home Affairs. Particularly so because the lead agency for advice to this government on matters related to drug use, drug abuse, I suppose, matters related to the use of drugs in Barbados. That responsibility rests with them. He took a while, having mentioned all kinds of other entities, before he actually got to what the National Council on Substance Abuse would have submitted to the Joint Select Committee looking at this matter. And when he did make reference to their submission, which was a written submission, they did not appear personally, when he did make reference to their submission, he said of them that they are in support of the initiative to establish or to provide legally for access to medicinal cannabis in Barbados. That is true. What he did not say, and what I would like to point out, Mr. Speaker, and it will take a little while because I'm quoting from the report and their written presentation to the committee, the Joint Select Committee. When therefore considering the outcomes of regulatory changes to allow access to cannabis and cannabinoids for medical use, in addition to considering health risks and benefits for patients, it is important to take into account the potential broader social public health impacts. Their approach is one of stressing caution. It is an approach which I support. It is an approach which we on this side have called for, and which I want to re-emphasize. Let me make it clear for those who easily misunderstand. I am in support of Barbadians having access to cannabis use for medicinal medical purposes. Let me make that clear in case there is anybody, you will have to protect me. You would have to protect me too, Mr. Speaker, for the Honourable Member from St. Joseph. Of recent date, he has got me in his crosshairs. So I support, and let me be clear about that Barbadians should have access to use of cannabis as a medicinal product to address the various ailments. But I still think that a measure of caution is necessary, and that we should still slow down the rate of pace at which we are pursuing this matter. I'm glad that following the call of the opposition in Parliament here, that the passage of this bill, or the bill, was deferred, and that it was given to the oversight of a joint select committee, and that deliberations were pursued in public, and that various entities across Barbados were allowed to come and make their presentations. There's a moral in that story, Mr. Speaker, that one voice in the midst of the multitude, in the midst of the tumult, can still be heard. And government heard that voice and deferred the passage of this bill and allowed for wider discussion. I still am of the view, Mr. Speaker, that we are not yet at that stage where we should pursue with this bill at this stage for various reasons. Even though I remind us again, for those who are given easily to forgetting, that I support Barbadians having access to the use of cannabis legally for medicinal purposes. Now, the NCSA, the National Council of you're familiar with that entity,
Very familiar.
Mr. Speaker?
Honourable member.
It has always been well led, well guided. And they have been expressing a view which suggests caution. The essence of my presentation this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, will be this. The general thrust of that presentation will be this. I sat as a member of that Joint Select Committee, and it would seem to me that every entity that appeared before that committee, and most individuals who made submissions, oral and written, to that committee, were stressing the need for caution, and that we do not pursue this at the pace at which we now seem bent on pursuing that. And I'll make reference to some of those entities and perhaps one or two of those individuals. It did not disagree with a move to have medicinal marijuana available to the public of Barbados, but they're expressing certain concerns, some of which have been addressed in changes to the bill, some of which have not been addressed in the bill in its newest iteration. But the bottom line is that they were stressing, let's be a bit more cautious about this and slow down. I heard that repeatedly with my ears as I sat on that committee. And so I have to share with you some of the thoughts of the NCSA. It is important to take into account the potential broader social and public health impacts. A second area of concern, a second point of concern, the NCSA accepts that there is valid reason to prescribe marijuana for medical purposes in the treatment of specific categories of illnesses like those mentioned earlier. However, we are also aware that save for limited jurisdictions, rigorous scientific testing of the use of cannabis as a medicinal remedy has been curtailed by legal restrictions. They are suggesting that they do not necessarily support the view that the science has properly and fully established the use of medicinal marijuana to the extent that many proponents say is the case. These restrictions, especially with respect to growing, production of cannabis, have resulted in a dearth of research into the efficacy of the use of marijuana for medical purposes. This is the National Council of Substance Abuse. This is a government agency. These restrictions, especially with respect to growing and production of cannabis, have resulted in a dearth of research into the efficacy of the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. And though I would not go so far as to agree that there's a dearth of research, I equally cannot go so far as to say that the science has fully confirmed the worth and usefulness of the product to the extent and for all of those reasons that have been indicated. An overview of the current evidence for the medical use of cannabis and cannabinoids, as well as highlights the limitations and important gaps in the evidence. This emphasizes the need for additional research and clinical studies, including larger and better designed trials, studies looking at dosage and the interactions between medicines, and studies with longer-term follow-up participants. So the case has not been made for the NCSA that the science has established the case fully. The unfortunate development arising from this anomaly is that patients, healthcare professionals, policymakers are without all the evidence they need to make sound decisions regarding the use of cannabis. This lack of evidence-based information on the health effects of cannabis has the potential to pose a public health risk. This is in the NCSA document, Mr. Speaker. In addition, as mentioned earlier, the potential economic benefits of the medical marijuana industry ought to be balanced against the social and public health impacts. And in this regard, we refer to the INCB 2017 report, which cautions that poorly controlled government programs for medicinal use of cannabis can potentially have adverse effects on public health when programs are poorly and improperly mounted. One of the reasons why I persist in my call for a slowing of the rate of pace at which we are proceeding about this, and one of the reasons why several voices that appeared before the committee were expressing caution, is because we are totally unaware, we are significantly unaware as to the regulations which will attach to the bill and which will seriously, significantly so, give operationalization to the bill. So we are somewhat operating in the dark when it comes to regulations, because they have not been presented with this bill. There's no indication that they're soon to follow the bill. There's no indication as to the manner in which they will be brought to the attention of the public in Barbados. Therefore, this bill is far-reaching in its scope, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from cultivation right up to export and import and all in between, medicinal use, retailing, dispensing, prescribing, transporting, all in between, Mr. Speaker. And we are not aware as to the import of the regulations which will attach to this, and to the extent that we are in the dark. Some people don't like the expression, the devil may be in the details, but the truth of the matter is, when we are brought face to face with the regulations, we may find that we're facing challenges as a country, or even as a parliament and a government, which we did not anticipate. The report cautions that poorly controlled programs may increase non-medicinal cannabis use among adults, contribute to the legalization of non-medical cannabis use by weakening public perceptions of the risk of using cannabis and reducing public concern about legalizing non-medical, so-called recreational cannabis use, which is contrary to international drug control treaties to which we are signatories. If you be patient, Mr. Speaker, the NCSA is clear that an unequivocal position must be taken with respect to the definition of medical marijuana. That's even that. This is the level of definition. That an unequivocal position must be taken with respect to the definition of medical marijuana and its permitted prescribed uses. It is important not to conflate the issues of recreational use of marijuana with medical marijuana, as seems to be reflected in the report of the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana 2018. The Honourable St. James North, I think, referred to that as well. The Honourable Prime Minister referred to that, and she made it clear that the government at this stage is not about focusing on recreational use of marijuana, but only medicinal use, and will hold its word and have a referendum on further recreational use of the substance. She made that abundantly clear. I'm not questioning that right here. All I'm saying is that the NCSA is saying that you got to be careful that when you attempt to establish this legislative platform for medicinal use of this substance, and you do not do it in a proper fashion, you can create a context in which out there in the public, the perception is had that you've relaxed the laws on the use of recreational marijuana. They are cautioning, therefore, that you be careful as you go forward. Now, that regional commission, of which we have heard, and we have copies of the document, says a wide usage of cannabis, marijuana, for purposes other than medicinal is often referred to as recreational. The Commission notes that, as discussed below, cannabis, marijuana is proven to have therapeutic properties as a stress reliever, so that the term recreational is somewhat of a misnomer since it ignores the mental health issues in this paradigm. You can follow that very easily, Mr. Speaker. They are simply saying, beyond the point, that if you poorly establish the context in which medicinal marijuana is to be used, that's the NCA's position, you can create a perception that the laws around the use of recreational marijuana have been relaxed. That's NCA. The Commission is going further, and they're treating to the definition of what is recreational use. And they're saying that that is a misnomer, and that is a non-point, and that is a non-issue, and that the substance should be seen as a stress reliever, a relaxer. And in this context, Mr. Speaker, it treats to your mental health, your emotional health, and it's not about recreation. And all we're saying here is that the fact that the NCSA should cite this stresses the level of caution that they are encouraging. One of the major concerns to the NCSA is the seeming trend of medical marijuana being the forerunner to recreational use of the substance, as has happened in many jurisdictions. Now, Mr. Speaker, they will not want to hear me say this, but this is true. There is a perception out there, notwithstanding what the government has in its manifesto, notwithstanding the fact that no less a person than the Honourable Prime Minister stood here today and said more than once, this is not about recreational use. There is a perception out there that this is but a way of getting us there. And this is a concern that NCSA is expressing here. The forerunner to recreational use of the substance, as has happened in many jurisdictions. I know you're a patient man, Mr. Speaker, and you will bear with me. The NCSA says that growing medical marijuana is not a get-rich scheme. It is a cumbersome process. Some other challenges which are of concern to the NCSA are outlined below. These include approval for medicinal use is a fairly new practice. For that reason, marijuana's effects on people who are weakened because of age or illness are still relatively unknown. Older people could be more vulnerable to the drug's harmful effects. That is what they're saying as a matter of caution. Question they raise: how will security of the crop. How will security of the crop be ensured? Now, listen, Mr. Speaker, we live in Barbados. When you get into what are truly agricultural communities of Barbados, you hear often a lament from farmers and those who are given to agriculture that they can't produce and reap anything for themselves. We know that we have had a problem with pretty larceny in this country for years. It's gone on south. We threatened all kinds of things. We've only locked up one man, as far as I know, who said he had permission about 1 o'clock in the morning to go and collect some stuff. As far as I know, you'll be more familiar with it, Mr. You frequent those places where these stories are told. But we've had a problem, and what about the security of the crop to be ensured? How will that be ensured? What systems of quality assurance will be established and maintained? Well, that's something that you could address. I think we have the skills or access to the skills and knowledge that can help us with it. If producing, how is money properly accounted for? What are the implications for banks and banks which must comply, especially with US-based regulations? We've heard some references to that, and we will get back to that type of thing. In occupational health hazards, protection of employees working directly in the industry, and then environmental implications, disposal of waste. We don't want to talk about disposal of waste today because we will be here for a while, and that the cultivation of this crop is a water intense process. I don't know if that is what they're saying. And I know you're a patient man, but I'm not going to detain you or the House any further, but simply to say, and the Honourable Minister really should have told us that his lead agency on this matter has some serious concerns and is expressing the desire that there will be a more cautious approach, even though the agency is supportive of having Barbadians to have access to medical marijuana. The science, I hear we're following the science. I'm not too sure, I have to be honest with you, where the science is. I have seen many articles on either side of this issue. I have listened to people who should know who have spoken on either side of this issue. So the science, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, is still divided. It is believed that a substance such as this, a psychoactive substance, which can possibly or potentially have such positive effects on the body, must be recognized as one which can equally have some damaging effects on the body. So there are two sides to that coin. No mention has been made.
Honourable Member, not to interrupt. That is just a question. Just a question for you. That is in relation to the medicinal marijuana.
That is in relation to marijuana.
Right, not the medicinal marijuana, correct?
As in relation to marijuana. Marijuana used in a medicinal context can positively impact the system, but equally it is being recognized that since it is so potent, it can equally negatively impact the system. And we have those here who are more learned than I am.
I remember the reason why I asked that, there's a distinction between the THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive component in relation to recreational marijuana, as against the medicinal marijuana.
Thank you, and if we want to get down there, I'll get down there in a few minutes as well. Because you're quite right in what you are saying. I'm not misleading the chamber. Not misleading the chamber. I'm going to get down there. All I'm saying is the science, the theory around the science says this is a potent psychoactive drug, and it can have very positive, good effects on the body. Equally, it must be recognized, since it can be so systemically influential or impacting or impactful, it can also have negative, seriously negative effects on the body. Now, nobody has made reference to the change with respect to the plant and the substance over the years. Because from my reading, if you go back several decades, that which was available to us was far more innocent plant and substance. But through processes of technical and chemical enhancing, we have changed the manifestation of the products which are derived from this plant, such that when you start to talk about the THC compound in the substance, you are talking serious stuff, Mr. Speaker. And to address what you were saying just now, 6 decades ago, the THC content was about 8%. 56 years ago, the THC content of which you spoke, the dangerous element, was about 8%. Today, the average can get up as high as 30%. So you are seeing a change in the level of potency because of what is involved in different forms of cultivation and various processes to extract substances which people want to use for various purposes. So THC content, 30% if used in the traditional way. But Mr. Speaker, you and I are familiar from the distance with the fact that people do what you call dabbing and mixing, and they are increasing the THC concentration in these substances up to as much as 80%. So you're talking about a different creature than that one that existed more innocently so 4, 5, 6 decades ago. And that is why you have to be cautious, know exactly what you're dealing with, exactly what you want to be cultivating, what you want to be handling, what you want to be processing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, from my understanding of the issue, Mr. Speaker, people have been decreasing the concentration of the other element, was cannabidiol, and increasing the THC. And therefore, you have interfered with the product in such a way as that you have enhanced the potential for negative impact while reducing the properties which would have prevented more addictive behavior. I don't know if I got that clearly, but I'm sure you understand, Mr. Speaker. You live in a world in which you're brought fairly close to these things.
Honourable member, I worked in the area before,
Yes.
in another profession, before I was in this profession.
Right.
So I'm very familiar.
Very familiar.
Exactly.
So you are getting a more powerful pot, but without the protective effects that used to come with less sophisticated and chemically enhanced strains now grown. So you're stripping out one element which prevents the predictive behavior, and you are enhancing the presence of that element which conduces to psychosis and other forms of undesirable behavior. And that is the context in which caution is being recommended. Now, marijuana and the money problems vis-a-vis access to the banking system. Honourable Member for St. Michael North spoke to that matter. The substance is still a Category 1 prohibited substance in the international context, and that presents problems with reference to access to banking for funding of finances, revenue derived from the industry. Already here in these parts, in this country, we are confronted with the challenges associated with correspondent banking, and even the Bankers Association here raised this as an issue and a concern as to how to treat funds, revenue derived from a marijuana industry, understanding that they operate in an international context where there's a level of prohibition with respect to allowing monies derived from this kind of trade and industry to enter into the banking system. Reference was made, I think, again by the member for St. James North, or the member for Bridgetown, I think it was, of the upwards of 30-plus states in the U.S. that have legalized the use of marijuana in some form for various reasons. However, federal law still considers the drug to be a prohibited substance, and therefore there are regulations with respect to banking access. The Honourable member for St. Michael North also alluded to that with reference to Canada, and I will get to him in a minute. I will get to him in a minute. Federal law places monies from marijuana trade in the category of what some people call dark money, Mr. Speaker, and exposes banks accommodating such funds to legal and regulatory penalties and other operational consequences. And this is a problem for us here in Barbados. The Bankers Association has spoken with reference to that. I haven't heard anything from the government that has suggested to us as to how they will resolve that issue going forward with this industry. Now, the Honourable member of St. Michael North wants us to tackle more robustly the banking practices in Barbados, and I am in total agreement with him on that, that these issues relative to banking practices in Barbados, especially charges put on the backs of poor people, this thing needs to be challenged. Fine, but there's one issue. This government, and no presenter with reference to this matter of medicinal cannabis industry, has said to us, how are we going to address the issue of banking access, which seems to be apparently a challenge, as was suggested by the Bankers Association when they appeared before the Commission, and is documented in their written submission. The Banking Secrecy Act of the U.S. prohibits accommodation of funds generated from this industry, I think I said. There's a clear indication that in the U.S. there may be change with reference to the law to allow for more adequate banking access for funds generated, but we are not yet there at the place in the U.S. where the law has been changed sufficiently so to accommodate funds generated from this trade. Now, Mr. Speaker, beyond the regulatory point with reference to lack of access to the banks, there is another more perhaps philosophical matter that I would need to address. Because if you're to invest in this industry, you must have access to capital unless you're loaded. Now, members in this honorable chamber don't qualify, with the exception of one. But if you're going to invest in this industry, you have to have access to capital. And if you can't have a relationship with the banking system, whence will the average, well, I shouldn't say the average, whence will the potential Barbadian investor be able to access capital to put into this industry if that matter of relationship with the banking system is not properly addressed? So exclusion of such marijuana trade transactions from the banking system will also mean lack of access to capital for those who need it most, those who otherwise do not have it. Persons like yourself, Mr. Speaker, persons like the Honourable Leader of the House on the other side, persons like myself, like I said, all perhaps with the exception of one Honourable member in this House from Christchurch. Now, I don't want to be facetious. I don't want to be mischievous, Mr. Speaker. The mooting of the re-establishment of a Barbados National Bank in some form should not be allowed to be perceived as being premised on this type of institutional circumstance. Let me put that in smaller and fewer words. It is in the interest of the government not to let the perception grow that when you talk about re-establishing a national bank, you are doing so to facilitate simply an industry. Now, I don't believe in that. I believe that's a nonsense argument. I'm making that abundantly clear for those who easily misunderstand. I don't believe in that, but that is a perception I've heard expressed. We can disagree or agree on the need to reestablish the Barbados National Bank. We can agree or disagree as to whether or not it was a mistake in the first place to divest ownership of the bank. But at the end of the day, if we want to consider or even activate, implement such noble initiative, then we've got to make sure that we don't have it abroad, that we're doing it for this reason. It doesn't make sense to me, but for what it is worth, I say that to you. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are some international conventions, of course, you would know, which limit the use of narcotic drugs, psychotropic substances, including marijuana, to medical and scientific purposes. That is the restriction placed on the use of that. Now, I say that to say this. When we get to religious use or sacramental use, we then run into a problem. Scientific purposes, the international community understands. Medical marijuana, there's a growing understanding with respect to that. More controversial is allowing marijuana use for religious or sacramental purposes. Now, Rasimba, as I might call his name, I'm not being in any way negative of him, and Adonijah, both and others made strong argument for legislation to allow for religious or sacramental use. I believe it is an argument to which perhaps only weak resistance can be made or found. I do not believe, or I should say I share their view, that if you are part of a bona fide, legitimate faith community, and that there are practices relative to your rituals and ceremonies which are not a threat when properly used to others, then you find it very difficult to put the argument that the subject of the use of marijuana for religious, sacramental purposes by a faith group should be made the subject of a public or national referendum. That is venturing into that territory which the constitutional rights of individuals preserve, in that you have a right to practice your religion so long as your practice is not detrimental to the well-being of others and the national community. So I find that argument very hard to resist. I do not know where the government is going to go on that matter, but a strong case is easily made for the use of marijuana for sacramental and religious purposes. Of course, one will always have to guard against abuse of every system, of every institution, every initiative, because I heard that you're an Anglican, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister seemed to locate you in that fifth community we call the Rastafari. And I'm not sure where you're located, but I know you're a religious man, and that you partake of the sacraments, whichever religion you are. And therefore, I am supportive of a cause like yours. If your faith and its practice is such that the use of this is important to that faith and critical to that faith, the expression of that faith, that is an argument that is very hard to resist, and a way would have to be found to accommodate that. Having said that, there are always those who will abuse. And tomorrow, what is a 5,000 member faith community around this sacrament, once a mechanism is triggered to facilitate its legal use, a 5,000 member community of faith could by next day become a 10,000. Now, I really was trying to be nice here all afternoon. You know, I'm being put upon by these two honorable souls. They're honorable people. So, Mr. Speaker, that argument, I think, was cogently put by those people, and I wait with bated breath to see what the government does with reference to that. Now, I will say what has been represented to me by a body with which I met. And it's simply this: if the government wants to introduce or legalize recreational use of marijuana, let them say so. Now, hear me very carefully. I speak to represent interests out there when they represent their concerns to me. My position is, I understand the government of the day to be saying that recreational use will become a subject of referendum. But there is still a body of opinion out there that believes that what we are indulging here today and what we have engaged in over the last several weeks is but a forerunner to bring us to that point where recreational use, even before without a referendum, becomes accepted in Barbados. And I say that because that's what folks, I'm not talking about somebody from the corner, I'm talking about reputable persons with responsible positions, have said to me. And you should say so. There's a perception that what we're taking here is an incrementalist approach to establishing the use of the widespread use of recreational marijuana in Barbados. Now, Mr. Speaker, my honorable friend from St. Michael North, I think made easily his worst speech in this chamber. Easily his worst speech. I'll tell you why. He always speaks with an honest heart and voice. But he did not do much to establish the case for the government with respect to this matter before us, because we have been told this is a medicinal marijuana industry that we are trying to establish. There are those who would say it's not so much about the medicinal benefits to be served to Barbadians as it is about the money Barbados potentially believes can be derived from this industry. Not that there's anything wrong with economic benefit, but there are those who would say that apparently it is less so about medicinal marijuana than it is about a marijuana industry that will bring money into Barbados. And I attack, in inverted commas, my honorable friend, because he strengthened that view when he lamented repeatedly the fact that we are behind on this. I don't feel comfortable using the specific terms he used, but we're playing the fool around this. We are playing around with this. Yes, he said that. We are playing around with this. And then he talked about the volumes of Canadian investment potentially available to us. But people are upset with us and want to know when we're going to do this, and when we're going to do this, and when we're going to do this. So the question comes back. Is it primarily about providing for medicinal benefits to the people of Barbados and others? Or is it primarily about generating investment and generating revenue for Barbados? And I don't refer to what my honorable friend said in an isolated fashion, because I noted very carefully when the Prime Minister spoke, the Honourable Prime Minister, she called it a new sector and made a heavy emphasis on the economic benefits. She talked about accommodation of Canadian investment and made reference to the large volume being put into the industry by investors. I have long said, I shouldn't say long, I have said before on this matter, that it seems to me that we're setting the stage for facilitating investment coming out of Canada. My honorable friend from St. Michael North seems clearly to confirm this today, that his, if not the government's, his concern is that we get this done quickly so that the potential investment from Canada can flow into Barbados. So is it about the medicinal benefits to be served, as outlined by my friend, honorable friend from St. James North, with reference to glaucoma and epilepsy and all these other ailments? Or is it about Canadian money flowing into Barbados, especially to help the government in these days of Mr. Burke? Now, that is the question that has to be addressed. Now, my honorable friend from the city, and he's both friend and honorable, he also spoke with reference to that. And he spoke as well about the money that can be derived from the industry. Now, I'm not decrying the fact that we can make money from the industry if we can. I'm simply saying that if we are primarily focusing on the health benefits which come to this country, then let us do so. The money is incidental. But if we're focusing on the money, then let us do so. The health benefit then becomes incidental. Now, this investment from Canada is still, I believe, at the speculative stage. Canadian investors are putting their monies into the marijuana industry because Canada has seemingly an unquenchable demand for marijuana. They can't get enough. But part of the problem, Mr. Speaker, is that there are places which can produce marijuana far cheaper than it can be done in Canada. So investors are looking for places to go. And the honourable member for St. Michael North apparently has found a couple. And he wants us to move speedily. And if we're to get that money speedily, we must move. Because those people, those Canadian investors, are gravitating to places like Colombia. Yeah? From my research, the cost of producing a gram of this substance in Canada is $1.50. $1.50. The cost of producing it in Colombia is 5 cents. Mr. Speaker, nobody has yet told us what the likely cost would be of producing this thing in Barbados. But you know and I know that traditionally we have had problems competing in the area of agriculture as well. And I do not know the extent to which we feel that we can successfully compete against places like Colombia. Hundreds of billions of millions of dollars already invested in the industry there. 8, 9, 10 big companies have gone from Canada recently investing in Colombia. The Honourable Member of St. Michael North wants us to get our act together so that we can stop the flow of investment from Canada into Colombia and have it brought to Barbados, where we do not have, Mr. Speaker, perhaps a sufficiency of land space available, where marijuana grown here will likely compete with established traditional crops in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, all I'm saying is there's some issues that we have to trash through, and I do not know the extent to which the Ministry of Agriculture has trashed through these issues. And that in itself is a story. Yes, that is true too. And they're growing wild all over the place and making the place look very aesthetically repulsive in some parts. And Mr. Speaker, that's a story to be told too, because this enterprise is not located under the purview of auspices of the Ministry of Health, you know. It's a medical thing we're focusing on here. But it's located in the Ministry of Agriculture, you know, Mr. Speaker. Now, the honourable member for the city told us honestly that he has some challenges with this. And they had to do some quick talking and good talking and apparently sound reasoning to sway him from his position. But I still wrestle with the fact that this thing is located in the Ministry of Agriculture principally and not the Ministry of Health. And Mr. Speaker, those people who came before the committee from the Barbados Association of Medical Professionals have that issue too. They have that issue too. And those people who came from the Pharmaceutical Society, they have that issue too, as to why this thing is located principally so in the Ministry of Agriculture and not, especially the health-related aspects of it, located in the Ministry of Health. So it seems to be more about a marijuana industry for economic benefit than a medical marijuana industry. BAP had some concerns. I just mentioned one of them. Mr. Speaker, listen to this. Listen to this. BAP is of the belief that there's not enough analytical capacity to monitor conventional drugs, far less in new drugs such as medicinal cannabis and its products. That is the Barbados Association of Medical Professionals. They are of the view we do not have enough analytical capacity to monitor conventional drugs, far less a new drug such as medicinal cannabis. It is confined presently, that is, BAMP concluded by saying, it is confined presently to prescribing approved drugs that are proven to be efficacious and safe. The Barbados Association of Medical Professionals, who appeared before us and who submitted also in writing, they are expressing concerns. This one, Mr. Speaker, is more of a social issue. I am sure that it will strike a chord with you. I personally do not like the way the issue of caregivers is addressed in the bill. It runs counter-cultural to what obtains in Barbados. Caregiving is part of Barbadian culture, Mr. Speaker. This bill prohibits teenagers, children, young people of a certain age from giving care to older people because they are restricted by an age prescription. And you know and I know that Granny has a 13 or 14-year-old daughter who helps to look after her during the day when others are not there and when that 13 or 14-year-old is on vacation. What is prescribed here runs countercultural to that. If you change a caregiver, you have to advise your medical professional. Every time you change a caregiver, Mr. Speaker, you know and I know that for the old person living on her own or living on his own, if George cross the road is available today, George gives care. If Sheila from next door is available tomorrow, she gives care. This requires that you advise every time you make a change in those who give care. This prohibits persons with a measure of record criminal conviction for drug use from giving care. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Mr. Speaker, you know and I know that you go out there are a lot of fellows in the neighborhood, and some ladies too, some girls too, who have convictions for this but they're giving very good care to older people. I'm simply saying that there's somewhat about this that runs counter to the culture that obtains in Barbados, I need to take a look at that. Now, regulations, Mr. Speaker. Now, regulations. This bill is far-reaching, wide in its scope, covers many areas, several components, and we don't have the regulations. I don't know how soon they're supposed to come to our attention. The best situation that we could have had is that these regulations were made available for scrutiny at the same time as the bill. Delay the bill and let us see the regulations. That's the best situation. The least appreciated situation will be one in which the regulations come to the Parliament for affirmative resolution after the bill is passed. Not negative resolution where they may sneak through here, Mr. Speaker, and you may not notice them and I may not notice them. But affirmative resolution where they have to be debated and discussed. We need to see the regulations. What are the regulations that relate to cultivation, to transportation, to retail distribution? What are the regulations that relate to these things? Security, import, export. What are the regulations, Mrs. Speaker? This is a wide, very wide berth given to the measures of this, and we are voting in the dark because the regulations will substantially change perhaps some people's understanding of what is presented in the bill. Mr. Speaker, even if you look at the penalties, people need to know what are the regulated penalties. Look, Mr. Speaker, what are therapeutic facilities? How are they to be regulated? The Honourable member tried to speak to that, but he wasn't clear. What are they anyhow? And there's a measure of ambiguity and to some degree of conflict in the definition as it relates to dispensary in the Pharmacy Act and the operationalization of what you call therapeutic facilities. Now, the Minister of Agriculture is, I presume, off on government business somewhere, and therefore is not here to address, but maybe Honourable Attorney General in his wrap-up, because my information is, and it might be wrong, I have no documented proof of this, Mr. Speaker, but the bill on the question pertaining to this resolution seeks to establish a cannabis authority, cannabis licensing authority. And that licensing authority, when established under the legislation, is supposed to grant licenses for private or public entities, I suppose, to operationalize certain aspects of the industry. Now, I am told, like I said, I'm asking a question, please clarify for me, that we already have, before this bill is passed in this House, we already have registered at Corporate Affairs, Barbados Cannabis Licensing Authority. I asked that not to be mischievous. I asked that to find out because I asked it quietly. I'm not asking it publicly whether or not it is true. Now, and those who have better knowledge of the law would tell me if it is legal to have an entity such as that registered with the official state registration agency even before the bill is passed. And if it is legal, is it ethical? And if it is ethical, is it transparent if you don't tell us that that has been done? I further am told that that authority has in fact employed staff Now, Mr. Speaker, you have to tell me if that is true or if it is not true. And I stand to be corrected on that, but that is the advice. So you have an authority even before the bill is passed, and the authority has employed staff, and we have not been told up until now officially. I'm also told that the authority, which is to be established under the law, but which exists without the passage of the law, and which has the power to grant licenses, though lawfully not brought into being by the legislation here, I am told, Mr. Speaker, that there's an entity, private entity, operating out there, registered out there already, we put it like that. So you have an authority, please correct me, and I am prepared to stand down and be corrected. and you have a private entity which the authority is supposed to license when the authority comes into being, I think, through passage of the legislation in this House. If these things are not correct, I am prepared to accept that they're not correct, but I am repeatedly told that, and I don't want to believe it. And if it is so, then there must be some reasonable explanation as to why that is so. Mr. Speaker, another issue I have is the matter of local ownership. We all recognize that we have to change patterns of ownership in Barbados. I've said that repeatedly. What is the potential for local ownership in this industry? I understand, even if you want to get into things like research and development, that is excessively costly, significantly costly. So what is the potential for local ownership? I know there's a provision that investment coming here, setting up, should have at least 30% local ownership. But to arrive at that 30% local ownership, that capital has to come from somewhere. And it would seem to me that there's a very narrow pool of capital in Barbados available to meet this kind of cost demand. And so therefore, I am saying in my own words, I think the same thing that the Prime Minister, Honourable Prime Minister sought to say, that we cannot establish an industry which is so foreign-owned that our people are not brought into a greater measure of empowerment. We have made those mistakes in the past. We see it with reference to tourism. We've seen it historically in Barbados, where foreign investment comes, it's given concessions, it sets up. The majority of the dollars derived go back out of Barbados and don't stay here to get into this thing at the end, which I presume is more beneficial, to get into areas like research and development and sophisticated product development. Mr. Speaker, will call for money. Do we have the capital in Barbados that will really help us to realize meaningful levels of Barbadian ownership in this enterprise? We have persisted with models of enterprise within the context of which we are primary producers and we export primary products. And as the Prime Minister properly put it, such value added is then created, and yet we are left to be simply operating at the lower end. Primary roles and primary stations occupied by us, while the rest of the world reaps the sweets. And we would want to know that this is not the case with this particular industry. I appreciate the fact that there's a more inclusive approach. This is one of the changes that the committee implemented after discussion and consultation. A more inclusive approach to allow for local participation with respect to access to licenses and so forth, and so forth, and so on. Now, Mr. Speaker, I believe that we need to acknowledge when good is done as well. There was some concern about the use of the term recommendation in the document. I had my concerns about that. Others appearing before the committee had their concerns. It was objected to by BAMP, it was objected to by the pharmacists, others objected because according to them, it implied no scientifically proven predictability with respect to dosage or medical purposes. And also the issue of complementarity between different drugs was raised. And so the removal of this term, recommendation, from the bill, I think was a step in the right direction, and the committee, I believe, is to be applauded for that. But we're still left to wonder what our retail distributor license is, how will this function? Again, you're talking about regulations. I don't want to go over that again. Let me close, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've taken too long. Let me close with this comment. Responsible government is the mandate which I think is given to this administration. A result at the polls of 30 love could only be interpreted as a call for responsible government. Responsible government means doing that which is prudently considered necessary to take this country forward in every which way. A responsible government is not to do those things or to do otherwise than those things that will take us forward. Part of responsible government, though, is to pause when the need has been pointed out to you, to pause and take a little bit longer. Not to desist from your action, but to pause and take a little bit longer to do what you're doing and make sure you get it as right as you possibly can. And I support having a situation in Barbados legally established where people have access to marijuana for medical use in properly controlled circumstances and in a context where it is proven that the science brings merit to the table. I will not vote in support of this resolution because I believe we need to pause and give further opportunity. And I also believe that we need to see the regulations attendant upon this. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, let me make this comment in no attempt to be mischievous. I can only say it as I see it. Mr. Speaker, there will be 23 units of opinion that come down from Bay Street to this chamber. And they will speak with a collective voice because they have a sense of collective responsibility. But there are matters over which a higher principle is to be observed, as indicated by the Honourable Prime Minister when she spoke. When we get to the issue of recreational use of marijuana, the whip would be off. As intimated by my Honourable friend from St. Michael North when he spoke, I will not support that use of recreational marijuana. Because though the principle of collective responsibility applies, there's sometimes higher principles to which you must adhere. And there are 23 views that would come down from Bay Street, often wearing a common cloak. And they will be expressed in one voice. But I want to make a call upon some of my honorable friends on the other side, on the back benches, who are not part of that collective responsibility arrangement, to stand up and simply advise your colleagues on the front bench. In this instance, look, I want to support legally established access to medical marijuana in Barbados, but we have to get it right. And all of these people who came before us have expressed concerns and called for caution and have suggested that we can do this better. And in that regard, therefore, I am calling on some of my honourable friends on the back benches of the Parliament and the Cabinet to vote against this simply by that vote to say, slow down, slow down, slow down. I thank you.
Honourable Member
That's the difference. I don't seek to
Honourable Member St. Peter.
You guys can't even see it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I don't seek to stop you from saying what
I,
you can't say both.
I think the chamber, Mr. Speaker, I need a little bit of protection.
There's side distractions.
No, they're not distracting me. I think they may be distracting the one who is adjudicating in this chamber.
Okay.
So I was just pausing just in case there were. I'm not saying that there were. And I understand, and I think most of us do, understand the need for the Honourable Member for St. Michael West. There's a chair next to him which has been vacant for a while, and he is looking for company, it seems, and is encouraging. using a good quote, good biblical quote, whosoever will may come. The kind of begging approach that he's using, though, Mr. Speaker, I don't think is going to get him the company that he so badly seems to seek, or seems so badly to seek. I want to speak for a little while, not using any slurs, not talking about what I believe, but what I hear. I want to take a little bit of a different approach. I want to begin by saying that I think most of my colleagues know me and know that I am very clear about my convictions. I am also very clear that anytime, and I've said this to the people who I represent, those good constituents from St. Peter, that anytime government policy gets in the way of my personal convictions, then my personal convictions will take precedent. I say that and I follow by saying that I fully support this medicinal cannabis bill. Now, I have not been asked to bring any message to this chamber. What I will say in my contribution is what I feel in my heart. When I was a little boy at Barbados Mid School, afterward called Barbados Primary, now part of Gordon Greenwich, we used to talk about going to the clinic to get a teeth pull. And one of the things that I've remembered from that time, which is many years ago, is that I would hear that in order to get the teeth pull, the gum would be injected with cocaine. Now, I've often wondered why an illegal substance would be used to ease the pain of a youngster or young girl who got to get teeth pulled. And I think from my primary school days, I recognized that while misuse of a substance may be wrong, there are substances that, even if wrong when misused, can be properly used for the benefit of people. And my research has told me that opioids generally are used for pain control, among other things, but like anything else, can be abused. So that whenever I have to tell, and I'm moving away from the opioids, whenever I have to tell a constituent or a friend that when you are a bad diabetic, you have no right trying to eat a hand of bananas. I don't tell them that because bananas are bad. I tell them that because in certain states of health, then you should be eating a third of a banana, not even a whole large one. Cannabis has been used in the treatment of various ailments. We know of the pain management that it is used for, but from my early days, I remember coming to the understanding that cannabis was an effective treatment of glaucoma. I think that was the first illness that I remember hearing and understanding that cannabis could be used for. I subsequently would have found out that it is also used in epilepsy. It is used in the treatment of cancers. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast spoke to the effects of chemotherapy. And that is an area, well, cancers generally is an area that I have a very soft spot for, if only because my best friend died from cancer. My sister died from cancer. My brother-in-law died from cancer. My uncle-in-law died from cancer. My grandmother, maternal, died from cancer. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that any treatment that could ease the pain that I saw in those people who were in my immediate circle, not to speak of those who I know of, who have also died, who are not in that very immediate circle. Anything that could ease their pain and their suffering, I am prepared to support. I believe that medicine ought to be aimed at helping people, healing people. I was hospitalized in 2015 with pulmonary embolism. I think that is the word that was used. 2 blood clots. But I was in severe pain. And I was prescribed to deal with the pain a similar type of substance. It wasn't cannabis. I think it was morphine, if I'm not mistaken. And that was prescribed to me, a person who does not believe in the regular use of these kinds of substances. But I accept it because it was used then in a medicinal way. It was used to ease pain that I felt was going to drive me out of my mind. I believe that medicine has to have a people-centered approach, a human approach. And so when there are references that would suggest that this is not something that should be used, and there is no reference, no connection with the fact that it can assist people, then I have a challenge. And I have a challenge especially when I watch CNN at night, the few times I get to watch, and I see perfectly acceptable medications which have as their side effects a list as long as the ABC highway, the last of which says death. I begin to wonder, what is it that we are doing or thinking as a society? And I am sometimes forced to come to the opinion or come to the conclusion that we are a people who refuse to look past what has been told to us or taught to us. My late father often said to me, there is none so blind as he who will not see. There is none so blind as he who will not see. He who refuses to see what we are talking about, what somebody is talking about. And that is why we get a lot of conflicts, because there are people who refuse to see, to assess, and to analyze. Now, I've talked about the human approach to medicine and alleviating the suffering of people who have particular illnesses. We have been hearing that there is some conflict between treating to people as human beings who suffer from certain ailments and economic benefits of an industry. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that that is a false dialectic. It is a to put those two things together and to suggest that there is some mutual exclusivity is really not to understand how an economy works. So that if soursop is good for you, and you decide that we want to plant 300 acres in Soursop, then the economic benefit should not be pushed because you're taking a good thing and trying to make money out of it. As a politician, I have a view on the thing of making mileage out of stuff. And the only view that I have on that is that if I help somebody who is poor, I'm not calling the media to make a big fuss over it. But if coconut trees or coconut water is good for you, or soursop or passion fruit, or akis or dumps, and I can create a new avenue of economic activity while satisfying what I think is good for you, then I think it's something that ought to be celebrated, pushed, and accepted as new economic activity. And that is why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I support the feed program. I support any program that will get us planting more root crops for the nutritional benefit and also for the economic benefit that it can bring to citizens of Barbados. I do not hold that the two are mutually exclusive. I am not going to accept a false dichotomy. I believe that a good thing can be celebrated as good while allowing the country to earn economically from that good thing. As a matter of fact, I think that is how economies should work. We should be looking to make money as a country from things that are good for people. I would prefer if we went into all good and get rid of sweet drink factories. Now, I am not saying that because I want the sweet drink factories in Barbados to close down, because there are a few people from St. Peter who work at some of these factories. But I would prefer, Mr. Speaker, if all of our economic activity was centered around things that are good for people. So there is no dichotomy for me. There is no necessity for me to think or to accept the suggestion that because a thing is good, there cannot be a focus on the economic benefit for the country. And so I just wanted to speak to that. Now, I started by saying that I was not sent with any message to come here to speak on this bill. I have a brain, and I think for myself. The people in St. Peter know that I think for myself. And I articulate my views very clearly, generally speaking, except when I am misunderstood by the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, who sometimes say that what I'm talking is trash. But I'm going to leave, I prefer the voters to speak to that rather than taking his word for it. One of the concerns that I had, and I'm not sure why the Honourable Member for the City could not have concerns. I had concerns. And I'm happy to be part of a cabinet, and I'm happy to be part of a government that allows people with concerns to raise those concerns and to have those concerns addressed. My concerns had to do with control. And I think that is a concern that most people have. And I'm happy that the bill is framed to ensure, and remember, this is not new ground. There are others who have gone before. And this party believes in listening to people, rubbing shoulders, listening to people, and learning from people, including learning from their mistakes. Controls that would see licenses for cultivating, licenses for transport. So I will not be able to put, unless I have a license, any cannabis for medicinal purposes in my vehicle and take it anywhere. There are going to be licenses for transport, licenses for laboratory work, licenses for processing, licenses for research and development. And on the matter, Mr. Speaker, of research and development, I want to say to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that because over the last 30 years, the level of THC has gone up and the level of cannabidol, I got to speak to the cannabinoid, has CD4, I'm advised, has reduced. I want to say to the Honourable Member for St. Michael West that part of what Barbados intends to do as it develops this medical cannabis industry is to focus on research and development that will increase the medicinal properties. And we're not going to be first to be doing it, but to work on research and development that will increase the medicinal property of medical cannabis. We want, Mr. Speaker, to produce the highest quality of medicinal cannabis in the world. We intend to be world leaders. We intend to be world leaders in whatever sphere of activity we get ourselves involved in. You can see that from how we've operated as a party over decades. You can see that from how we operate as a party now, including the leadership from our Prime Minister, taking the lead in the struggle to get the large powers to understand that we're not dealing with no 2%, we're at 1.5, 1.5 to stay alive. We are taking the lead. And in the matter of medicinal cannabis, we also intend to take the lead. We intend to build out over time, because it's not going to happen immediately, our research and development, because that is where a lot of the value added is going to come as well. Research and development, the patents, the Americans know very well how to do it. Do the research, do the development, and then take the patents, and those patents become tradable, highly valuable. That is the direction that this government and this country will be going. So I just want to say that as it relates to the matter of the changes in the chemical composition of cannabis over time. I want to reiterate also that we have workers in Barbados who are, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael North would have mentioned this, I think the Honourable Prime Minister also did, but I'm duty-bound as Minister responsible for them to say to this Honourable Chamber that having visited Canada and recognize, and this is just in the last month, recognize that some of the traditional farmers are both moving into the medicinal cannabis business as well as selling portions of their farms to people in the medicinal cannabis business, that we run the risk of our people not being able to be productively employed outside of Barbados in Canada because of a situation that may see their earnings being classified as the proceeds of crime. And so there is a very real reason, and we may want to call this, some of us may want to call it economic, but Mr. Speaker, those workers have families who they support, who they provide for. Those workers have themselves to eat. And so we would not want to place them in a position where they cannot eat because of working in an industry that is seeking to produce medicine. It is so incongruous even to try to fathom. You're working in an industry that is creating the medicine, and your earnings from that work could be considered proceeds of crime. We have to make sure that they are not placed in that kind of a position. I also want to, and I don't want to appear to be, in this point, responding to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, but our decision to move to a joint select committee would not have been. I think I can understand why the Honourable Leader of the Opposition would want to feel that his intervention caused us to move to a joint select committee. It is not based on ego. I know the honourable member not to have such a large ego. It is not based on ego. It is based, I feel, on a desire to say to those who may have voted Dems last time and who are a little bit disillusioned and who know they should come over to the Labour Party but may be looking to the Breadfruit Party, he may want to be saying to them, he may want to say to them that, his interventions in Parliament are causing the government to take certain decisions. He, Mr. Speaker, knows because he was with us before he left us, but he knows our approach to governance. He knows that we rub shoulders. He knows that we listen to people, particularly in matters that are important, particularly in matters that can be divisive, particularly in matters that may need further ventilation. And so we took a decision to go to Joint Select Committee, not based on anything we heard necessarily in here, but we constantly listen to people. And I think the honourable member for the city was really eloquent this morning in identifying, and I really want to congratulate him for being so open, identifying the issues that were raised and saying clearly to this chamber and saying clearly to Barbados, this one we adjusted, this one we adjusted, this one we didn't adjust because we didn't think it needed to be adjusted, being frank with the people, so that even those interventions that were not accepted, the honourable member, as he led the debate, indicated to the public, through this honourable chamber and through yourself, why we did not accept some of those suggestions. That is the governance that the honourable member for St. Michael West knows about, because he was nurtured in this good Barbados Labour Party. Anything good he takes to the other place will be based on the foundation that was laid in this great party. Now, I also need to say, and I need to say this because of my background, because of what those who sent me here know about me. And I say know about me because my people in St. Peter know me to take principled positions. They see, just like they see the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's signature on the manifesto, they see mine as well. Mine is not as close to the leader as his was, but they know that wherever on the page mine is, it means that I've committed. And just by the way, Mr. Speaker, I signed a blank sheet of paper. I signed a blank sheet of paper because I recognize that these signatures were to be placed in typeset and scanned so they could be placed on the brochure. But I signed it knowing what the policies were, knowing what the manifesto included. I was not raised to sign things that would put me in trouble later. And I really, really sympathize with anybody who signed blank things, not knowing what they've signed.
Honourable member, there's a phrase that I will quote for you, very important phrase, non est factum. Non est factum.
Non est factum.
Yes.
Okay,
it is not my deed. A case called Gawley versus Lee.
Okay, non est factum.
Yes, whatever you affix a signature, you have read it. You are bound by it.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, honourable member.
The old member is misleading us, and I really would rather not have to disturb him. I never, Mr. Speaker, your absence, you weren't here, indicated to this honourable chamber that I signed a blank piece of paper not knowing what was in the Barbados Labour Party manifesto. What I did say is repeated references to my signing on this blank piece of paper brought me to the realization, considering the day in which we live, that that is a dangerous thing to do, especially for people that operate at this level. I do not know if the honorable gentleman from St. Peter can tell us where that blank piece of paper is today with that signature, or where that signature will next appear. That was the concern. They need to listen carefully.
Mr. Speaker, that blank sheet of paper affixed my signature to a document that said we would move toward legalizing cannabis for medicinal use, and that we would place any questions of cannabis for recreational use to public referendum. That is what I signed. That is what I hold to. That is still the position that I am following. My views on that will not change. And there is nothing in this bill that causes me to feel that we are trying to legalize cannabis for recreational use by legalizing cannabis for medicinal use. Because when a drug is added to the formulary, I never have given thought to the possibility of adding the drug to the drug formulary, meaning that there is some sinister move afoot to make the drug available over the counter. That doesn't ring in my head as making a whole lot of sense. I would not stop a good drug from being added to the formulary only because I felt, somebody 10 years from now gonna want to begin with this to end in everybody. I don't understand how you run a country that way. I don't understand how you run a household that way. I would not refuse to buy a harmful substance only because some adult in my house can ingest it. It doesn't make any sense. And I am really confident, I keep saying this, the people in this country are a lot more sensible than some people think. They understand when an argument makes sense, and they understand when it doesn't. I do not see this as any precursor to wanting to legalize recreational marijuana outside of a referendum. I don't, and that remains my position. Now, the final thing I want to speak to is the matter of, and it follows on from what I said just now. In every sphere of activity, there is risk. Life is by nature an exercise in risk-taking. So that when, Mr. Speaker, you got into your vehicle this morning, given that you did not get into that vehicle on the compound of Parliament, there was a certain risk that you may not have reached here this morning. You could have gotten into an accident, the car could have been written off, and I'm not wishing any of that stuff. The same thing for me. I drove from Rose Hill, St. Peter this morning, quite a long way. My honourable neighbour from St. Lucie drove a lot further than me. There were all kinds of risks. Those risks should not be allowed to paralyze us. You do not allow risks to stop you from taking good, reasoned action. And I want to reiterate that because there are certain risks inherent in every activity, and because of that there are risks involved in any new kinds of activity, that should not cause us not to engage in the activity. Because, Mr. Speaker, if that were our guiding principle, we would not yet have invented the wheel, because a wheel can crush. We would not yet have invented the wheel. We would have said, somebody's going to get rolled over by this, so let us not even think about doing anything about it. That is not how societies progress. Societies progress by people taking risks, calculated risks. You put all the parameters in place, all the safeguards in place, but risk. And I would want to say to the chamber, and I'm not addressing anybody in particular, except you, Mr. Speaker, to whom I always must address, that when if I read, well, I don't want to, let me not use that word. If I use as an example, and I like to use this example as it relates to risk, and I use this example in my church from time to time. If Jesus did not take risk, he would not have been alone with a woman who had a whole lot of husbands and living with somebody who was not her husband. We call her the woman at the well. That is what she's referred to in Scripture. If he was not prepared to take risk, he would not have done that. If he were not prepared to take risk, he would not have found himself in the company of people who imbibed lots of alcohol to the point where he himself was referred to as a drunkard, a wine bibber. I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, to say to us that in every new area of activity, in fact, in every activity, there are risks. The role and function of a good government is to consider the risk, not ignore them, to consider the risk, to assess the level of risk, and then to decide, to make a decision as to what, if anything, can be put in place to mitigate those risks. This Barbados Labour Party government is the kind of government that follows that path. We have discussed this for a long time, and we discussed this, Mr. Speaker, before we came into office. We discussed this before we came into office, not in as much detail as we would have in the joint committee and maybe at cabinet, but we started this discussion, so this did not surprise us in terms of what some of the issues would be. But we've considered the issues, we have listened to the input from those who have made their submissions prior to the Joint Select Committee and during the Joint Select Committee hearings, and we have put in place a number of safeguards with more to be added when the regulations come. And so, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say to this honorable chamber that, my father loved bush tea. Cercil bush, mango leaves, avocado leaves. And I do not remember ever hearing of any rigorous testing. I do not know how many cercil bush leaves should be in a cup of tea. I do not know how many mango leaves. He also liked orange peel. I have never heard of the testing done. But I drank a lot of the bush tea. I am satisfied that a lot more testing has been done so far on cannabis. I am satisfied that the results of the testing so far have given me the comfort that there is good medicinal value in cannabis, that it is helpful to human beings. I understand that I represent human beings, some of whom fall ill, and some of them will need treatment. I am satisfied that even as science evolves, milk being bad, milk being good, milk being bad, milk being good, wheat being good, wheat being bad, I understand that science gives us certain guidelines, and based on my research, I am satisfied that this Barbados Labour Party government has taken the right approach to this issue of medicinal cannabis, recognizing that there are benefits to people, recognizing that equally there are benefits to the economy, and also recognizing that we as a responsible government we have a responsibility to go into and discover new frontiers, to take our people, listening to them as we go, and acting on their behalf and in their interest. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make a relatively brief intervention in this debate. I want to say from the outset that I fully support this piece of legislation being introduced into this chamber. I also want to remind those who are listening that having sat on the other side for several years, that it gives me great pleasure to know that this administration has kept true to its word in ensuring that a consultative process takes place in this House of Parliament in relation to the establishment of joint select committees. And thus far, we have had 2 joint select committees, I believe, one on the integrity in public life legislation and one now in relation to the medicinal cannabis industry bill. It speaks, Mr. Speaker, to an administration that is prepared not only by its manifesto promises, but also by its action once in government to ensure that the full consultative process takes place with the people of this country. And for that, I am ecstatic to know that those who had concerns in relation to this piece of legislation had the opportunity to be able to share those concerns, to voice those concerns, and no doubt to have many of those concerns addressed. Mr. Speaker, I have to speak this afternoon from a personal perspective in relation to this medicinal marijuana industry legislation. And I do so, sir, because I suffered with childhood asthma. And I recall my mother trying to find every possible thing under the sun available to her and to those around her to be able to cure my asthma. As a child, I had something called Liquid of Life. It was a red bottle with a very dark portion that I was given a very bitter medicine. I had all kinds of Circe bush. I remember even being made to stand by a papaw tree, and the theory was that if you measure the child to the pumpkin tree, as it grew, you were able to, a papaw tree, that as if you grew, basically the asthma would grow out of you. I was also, sir, as a child, given tobacco tea as well, sir. Again, because my mother came from a generation where a belief in what was natural existed in our family. And therefore, while, yes, the conventional medicine would have obviously been available, sometimes we have to accept that that does not always work, sir. And I basically had lots of things that allowed me as a child to be able to grow out of my asthma. The tobacco, sir, also then led to attempts to try even marijuana tea. Because again, at that time, sir, while there were some concerns about it, it was an attempt to try to find whatever relief could be given because my asthma was really bad. Even if I went into the ocean, I used to start to tremble, I used to start to get a very bad case of asthma. I can't tell you what it was that allowed my asthma to go away, but it could have been a combination of all of those things, sir, or it could have been one of those things. I don't know. But what I do know is that I don't suffer with it today in the way that I used to. I start there, sir, because a year ago, as many of you know in this chamber, I would have been diagnosed with breast cancer. I would have disclosed that to the public, and I started on a journey where I explored various types of treatment that was available to me, sir. It is no mystery that I underwent a course of chemotherapy, but along the way, sir, I also did my own research because I took myself back to where I was when I was a child, and I knew that not only the conventional medicine may have a role to play in my own diagnosis, but I went back to what as well was also the traditional, what they will term alternative medicine. And I stumbled, I know you're thinking that I'm going to say that I had dosages of marijuana, but I will say to you, sir, that I actually research soursop. And I started to take soursop tea for every single morning while I was from the date of my diagnosis and up until today. Within a week after my first session of chemotherapy, sir, the lump that had plagued me and that had led to the diagnosis disappeared. Much to the shock and awe of the doctors in Miami, that the results were so quick in the removal of the cancerous lump. Now, sir, again, I cannot stand here and say to you that I can point a finger and say that it was the soursop tea. But what I will say to you is that my understanding of this debate is one that must take us on a journey as to whether or not things like medicinal cannabis and things that are natural that have been here from generation after generation, that these things, sir, based on all the scientific evidence, and certainly in some cases not even so much scientific as well, have led us to a conclusion that there are medicinal benefits to things that are natural, that exist around us, that surround us, and that depending on the type of condition that persons may suffer with, they have been able to get relief, sir. So I stand here as a proponent of not just natural medicine, but certainly of any medicine which is natural that is in some way going to bring relief to any individual. I also want to go further, sir, because much of the research has shown that there have been benefits even when you are going through chemotherapy treatment for persons suffering with cancer to be able to get relief from the same medicinal marijuana. It is also a fact, sir, that the nausea and the vomiting which people experience, which I was fortunate that I didn't have the extent to which I've heard some people complain of, but that the fact that marijuana has been identified as a remedy to alleviate a lot of the pain that persons go through, that it can only be a good thing, sir, and that I'm glad that the research has taken us in a direction where for a large part where people are going through something as traumatic as cancer or any other disease, that the opportunity is available for them to explore an alternative to be able to supplement their condition. The other thing, sir, that makes me even more convinced that this piece of legislation has a part to play in alleviating symptoms is that I have had the opportunity of dealing with persons in this country who have been diagnosed with cancer, first of all, and also have had to hide in order to be able to obtain, whether it was the marijuana plant or to smoke marijuana, sir, in order to get some kind of relief to their symptoms. And it is a fact, it is well established, that even when you are taking morphine for pain, going through cancer treatment, the combination of the THC in the marijuana as well as the morphine actually helps to relieve symptoms. And I know personally of people who I've seen close to death, having explored all of the various medicinal properties that are out there on the market, all of the pharmaceuticals, having to find themselves in a position where they have been forced, sir, to rely on the cannabis plant for some kind of relief in their dying days. Sir, as the Honourable Member for the City indicated earlier, this piece of legislation also allows persons who have been having to make their applications through the process or go behind closed doors to ask for the relevant permissions to be granted, to now be able to come forward and obtain a prescription from a doctor, to be able to not now have to go in the dark of the night or the day to be able to obtain these prescriptions, but to feel comfortable that they can now get a certain level of relief from their condition, sir. I do not know how, as a modern day administration, with all of the knowledge that all of the persons in this room possess, how in any way we could stand on the floor of this parliament and not support a medicinal cannabis industry bill for all of those reasons cited, sir. If you take the history of cannabis, and I've done some research, sir, the Honourable Prime Minister mentioned the document, but I don't think it has been made a document of the House. and I would want to make reference to it, so I would want to make a document of the House, the special time edition. It is titled Marijuana, the Medical Movement. And for those of you who know, the Times magazine is a very established, very reputable magazine, which too, like others, have found their way researching and identifying potential benefits in relation to medicinal cannabis. And this article that appears in this special edition, sir, speaks to a plant that has been around from 10,000 BC. It speaks, sir, to back in 1842, a number of clinical trials of cannabis that were found to provide an effective muscle relaxant and anticonvulsive remedy for a number of patients, sir. 1842. Between 1840s and the 1930s, many people may not be aware, but cannabis was actually widely prescribed. It was found to be helpful for pain, for bronchitis, for venereal disease, and for postpartum depression. In 1915, sir, a gentleman by the name of Sir William Osler, often called the father of modern medicine, dubbed cannabis the most satisfactory remedy for migraines. In 1964, Israeli doctors, and this, sir, you know, it is interesting that we read these documents and we go so as far as Israel in terms of people actually finding a medicinal benefit from this particular plant. But in 1964, an Israeli doctor isolated and synthesized the THC in marijuana's main psychoactive ingredient. And that, sir, too, would have stimulated the development in relation to the separation of the THC and also the CBD as well. In the United States, you would have had a situation where in the 1930s, there was a movie called Reefer Madness, which sought to associate marijuana with having caused certain psychoses and also being related to crime. And I want to pause there, sir, because, you know, if we really understand history, we will understand that it is only in recent times that this particular plant became such a concern to an entire population and to the world. But the history speaks for itself that this plant was around for a long time. It was being used, and in particular, when that movie came out in America, it was against a background where there was a lot of immigration from these Latin American countries. There was also a lot of immigration from Mexico. There was also a lot of migration in relation to black people in America, sir. And there was a fear that a number of these immigrants were actually using this substance. And the fear then was passed on in terms of creating a frenzy that this particular plant was now not a plant that should be used and should be widely available. And the federal government would have sought to basically provide certain restrictions on the use of the cannabis plant. That, sir, obviously, as we all know, sometimes the things that happen outside, externally, impact on what happens in the Caribbean. And as a consequence, no doubt, the fear that was created in the United States also expanded to places in the Caribbean as well. And without us going and doing our in-depth research and recognizing that clearly this plant had been around for generations and had been providing satisfactory relief to a number of persons in the Caribbean, we obviously continue to follow what America was doing, sir. This medicinal cannabis industry bill today, sir, starts the process of reversing what I believe has been a period of brainwashing in relation to the medicinal value of the medical marijuana industry. And I hope that those who are listening appreciate that it is important for us as an educated class of persons today to be able to decipher for ourselves when we have been handed down something and the time has now come for us to be able to reverse what has happened previously. That's fine. Sir, I want to remind this chamber, because I'm sure that many of you may have also seen where this debate started to heighten over the last couple of years, when a child I believe she was about 2 years at the time, where a video was put out online about a child called Charlotte Fiji, who suffered with epileptic seizures. And her parents took it of their own volition to seek out whatever treatment they could in order to allow young Charlotte to be able to lead as normal a life as possible, sir. As a consequence, the family was able to reach out to a team of scientists and individuals, so doctors who were involved in the area of research called the Stanley Brothers. And this took place in Colorado, which, as you know, would have been one of the first states in the United States to be able to move towards the legalization of medicinal marijuana. And these persons created what was described as a crossbreed, a strain of marijuana which is high in the CDB, but low in THC. This was administered to young Charlotte, and as a consequence, sir, her epileptic seizures were reduced from every 2 to 4 hours and requiring hospitalization to seizures now occurring 2 to 3 times per month and almost solely in her sleep. I also recall, sir, watching Sanjay Gupta, Dr. Gupta, a few years ago, also making another turning point in our understanding of marijuana. Coming on CNN and disclosing videos of the same child, Charlotte, but also persons who were suffering with Parkinson's disease, for whom the use of medicinal marijuana was effective in preventing the tremors that persons experience from that condition, sir. It therefore says to me, Mr. Speaker, that there is medical evidence out there to suggest that the medicinal cannabis plant, or the cannabis plant, has great medicinal value. And it is not, sir, just that they are looking at it for cancer or epilepsy or any of these conditions, but there's also studies going on in relation to multiple sclerosis. It is a fact that low doses are now available to help control painful, disabling muscle spasms, which are result from multiple sclerosis. It has also been found to alleviate symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease. It has also been effective in nerve-related pain, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, and rheumatoid arthritis. It is also a substitute or an alternative for chronic pain and for persons who have been dependent on opioids. And we have seen a lot of research that has been done which has suggested as well that the number of persons who are now using opioids across the world has actually reduced as a result of the introduction of CDB into the medicinal marijuana industry. On the horizon, sir, and I believe why this administration believes that it must be on the cutting edge of what is to come in terms of developing a medicinal marijuana industry, is the fact that exploratory studies are ongoing in the following areas. They are looking at how medicinal marijuana can look to shrink cancerous tumors. It is also being directed to look at limiting the traumatic memories to help treat post-traumatic stress disorder. And something which is very near and dear to my heart and other members on this side certainly is the treatment that it potentially can give to persons who are suffering with the condition known as Alzheimer's. Because the focus now is trying to arrest the plaque formation of the brain in relation to patients who are suffering with this condition, sir. It has also been on the horizon now that persons are looking at slowing the progression of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated concussions. And sir, of particular interest again too to this country and certainly to the rest of the world is the progress that is being made in relation to the use of this plant in treating things like autism, assisting persons who are suffering with Asperger's, who are very anxious and unable to settle, but it gives them a way to be able to calm their system. It is also, sir, an area that I believe that we are seeing a lot of our people here in Barbados actually experiencing, and I believe, again, any opportunity for persons, whether to come in who have companies who can engage in research, to be able to work with local partners, to be able to find remedies for a number of these challenges, sir, can only be embraced and can only be in the interest of this country. Now, sir, I heard a lot of rumblings on the other side, despite the Honourable Member for St. Michael West indicating his support for this piece of legislation. And I just wanted to contextualize the research that has been done, because I'm not sure if the Honourable Member is aware of all of the research that is being done, all of the exploratory works that are basically out there to be done, and why the Honourable Member who would have spoken in relation to international business would also have spoken to the Canadians and others wanted to come to Barbados to be able to continue to do research. I don't know if he's aware, sir, but I wanted to take the opportunity to enlighten him if he was not aware. Because it wasn't that the Barbados Labour Party woke up one morning and decided, you know what, we're going to move towards medicinal cannabis industry. It is based on a lot of research that has been done, sir, in relation to this area. It is based on us being able to find opportunities, new avenues for business and creating entrepreneurship in this country. It is also, sir, you know, our focus, even when we created the international business sector, there was criticism because people didn't understand it at the time. And sometimes our fear of the unknown causes us to get into a frenzy and to reject things or to be concerned about things without a full appreciation of waiting to sometimes see how things will unfold. And I like the fact, sir, that this administration has not jumped fully into outright legalization or recreational use, but rather has made it clear that it will take its time to be able to unfold this industry in a way that appeases not just the church, but all of the concerned citizens of this country, all of the people who may have an expressed concern, the NCSA, all of the various entities that may have concerns about the rollout of this particular industry. We accept that there are those concerns, but what we cannot do as an administration is sit back and do nothing. Because you see, sir, I actually feel that we may have waited too long to seize the opportunity. You know, there's a saying, to seize an opportunity, you must first recognize it. And sometimes the last administration did not always see the opportunities that may have been presented. And whether it is in education or health or in any other area, the reality is that the last administration did not seize a number of the opportunities that existed. Up to this morning, I had a meeting, sir, with some persons who were looking to work with us in terms of setting up some digital books for our primary and secondary schools, to standardize texts across the system, but to do it in a more cohesive way where we develop a refined system in terms of education. And what was interesting, sir, is that the story that was told by these persons was that other territories in the Caribbean had forged ahead with being able to go digital in education, whilst Barbados, who had blazed a trail over 2 decades ago in relation to education, in relation to our system and edutech, was now playing catch up when Barbados was once the beacon in education and blazing its trail to be able to have the rest of the Caribbean following behind us, sir. So when the Honourable Member speaks of are we rushing ahead, and when I hear the former Attorney General speaks about why the rush to be able to pass this legislation, sir, I take my mind back to all of the things that the last administration did not do, that we had opportunities to take advantage of, that would have helped us to be able to make sure we had buses on the road, to make sure that we were able to repair the sewage system in this country, to make sure that we had drugs in the hospital, to make sure that our school plants were not falling apart, sir. So I don't believe that the last administration is any beacon to give me any direction or any vision for this country, sir, because I believe that the understanding comes from within the bosom of this Barbados Labour Party, and being able to flesh out a vision for this country and to be able to develop new sectors in the way that it has done generation after generation. So when we started to talk about the creative economy, there were concerns. People didn't understand that either. But we've been able to produce one of the most successful entertainers in the world. And we have now the potential to be able to tap into and to develop that industry and to make that something for more than just a Rihanna, sir. at the end of the day, this administration has always been at the forefront of seeing the opportunities and not just talking about it, sir, but also going after the opportunities as they become available. So when I heard the former Attorney General, who I remember back in 2017, he spoke about this issue of medicinal marijuana. He said, you know, it shouldn't be about legalization, but we must be talking about discussing the properties of the plant and how they can be exploited. Sir, they talk for year after year about medicinal marijuana. As we got closer to the election, I guess it sounded right to be able to go in the direction of making people in the society believe that they were moving towards recreational marijuana or even full legalization or even decriminalization, because that is the nature of politics, that sometimes people say things when it suits them, sir. But the Barbados Labour Party didn't say what suited it. It said very clearly, we will develop a medicinal cannabis industry. We will go to referendum on the issue of the recreational use. We were very clear. We didn't make it up along the way. This isn't something that we've collided with overnight. We've been very clear that it's going to be done in stages, and that yes, with all of the research that has been done, that will feed into the discussion and the consultative process, sir. Because you see, when I could hear the former Attorney General also say, you know, cautioning that he sees no reason to go beyond the exportation of plants. And he questions whether we have the capacity to do the extraction of oils, and that there's a lot of work to be done to establish laboratories, sir. How do we ensure that these entities are properly licensed? I understand why the Barbados electorate made sure that a Barbados Labour Party administration came to office, because I understand that the ideas were not there on the other side to be able to develop anything, sir, because they're still questioning something which they supported, which means that when they came to the public and told them all of these things about medicinal marijuana and about how we were going to move towards developing an industry, sir, they didn't understand or even ventilate in their own respective circles how they were going to achieve it. Sir, this Labour Party has been able to not just spend time with the respective ministries, both health, agriculture, and all the others, to be able to get into depth in relation to how to develop this sector, sir, but we have consulted. And I think, to our credit, that is something that, you know, we didn't just consult and leave it there. And yes, there may still be concerns in relation to the legislation, as there will be, as a legislation always comes to this chamber, and sometimes you have to fine-tune it because you have different interest groups. But the fact of the matter, sir, is that we have started the process. We are informed in the type of legislation that we have brought to this chamber, and I am happy that we are able to speak of medicinal marijuana in a way which allows persons to also realize that there are no opportunities, not just for employment, but also for studying in this particular area, sir. Because again, just like the exploration of oil and all of the avenues for study that have now arisen as a result of oil in the Caribbean, and certainly in Barbados and certainly in Guyana, sir, at the end of the day, the medicinal cannabis industry also brings with it a number of areas of study for the average Barbadian student and certainly Caribbean people to be able to take advantage of as well. Every year, sir, we award several scholarships and exhibitions to persons who have pursued science subjects. And we continue to lose those persons abroad, because after they go off to university, oftentimes those persons tend not to come back to Barbados, sir. They end up owing the Barbados government, being bonded, but then for whatever reason, they pursue their employment overseas. So I believe that this provides an opportunity, again, for our young people, our students, to be able to explore opportunities in this area, knowing that they can come back to their country to be able to work in an industry where we now will have partnerships with persons who are established internationally in engaging in research and the development of the medicinal marijuana plant. So I took a look at some of the opportunities that exist overseas, and I will just run through a few for the benefit of those who may not be aware. But there are several schools now offering things like internship preparation. There are now minors in cannabis industry, which combines agricultural science, horticulture, and business programs. Students get to grow hemp crops indoors and outdoors while focusing on specific areas of interest, such as botany, production and processing, evaluations, or marketing. There are also courses, sir, being offered in the Master of Science in Medicinal Cannabis Science and Therapeutics. And this is the first Master of Science program which is now dedicated to the study of medicinal cannabis. Sir, I think that that in itself says to this chamber that the world is not waiting on Barbados, but rather the industry is developing. There are opportunities beyond the growers and the cultivators and the harvesters and the persons who may transport medicinal cannabis. There are also opportunities in the science, because medicinal cannabis is a science. The difference between what the Honourable Member for St. Michael West speaks about, and certainly some others who may not understand this area very well, is that you have a situation, sir, where the component of cannabis called THC is what we often refer to as the one which creates the psychoactive reception. Now, I want to focus, sir, and focus our attention on the CDB a bit more, because that is where a lot of the tests have been done. That is where, even in the case of that I mentioned before, the child Charlotte, that is where the scientists have been focusing on. That is where a lot of the medicinal experimentation has been taking place, sir. And I think it is not fair to the plant, and it is not fair to those who have been working in the industry with the plant, to give a broad or general comment about the risks that are associated with it, without being very specific in identifying how the science and the research has taken place over the years to get us to the point where we make the distinction between the various components of the cannabis plant, sir. I don't think it is fair. And I think that the Honourable Member would do well, perhaps, to read the same report that I've laid in this chamber, so that he perhaps has a better understanding of the reality of what we are dealing with. Sir, I have some concerns generally in relation to not the medicinal cannabis, but I have some concerns, and I think that my colleague who would have mentioned it in relation to the NCSA and the results that are coming forward in relation to the substance abuse by our young people. Sir, it is a deep concern, and I know when I met with NCSA over the past couple of weeks, one of the things that continues to come to the fore is that we have more and more young people who are now using cannabis. But we also have another trend that is developing, sir, where a number of them are also using some pills, whether you want to call them ecstasy, whatever you want to call them. They are using some other substances that oftentimes are not being tested for when students go to, whether it is the Edna Nichols Center facility, or even when the random drug testing is done, sir. And I believe it is something that we need to be mindful of, because sometimes cannabis gets accused of certain behaviors when in truth and in fact, when you dig a little deeper, it may actually be a reaction to something else. We can't escape the fact that sometimes young people are given something which they believe to be cannabis, but in truth and in fact, it may be mixed with something else and they do not know. What does it mean for us as a society and in relation to this particular bill? It means that we have to spend a lot of money on educating our young people. I was particularly disturbed, sir, when I met with NCSA and I was told that there was a pullback by the last administration in relation to drug counseling programs within our primary and our secondary schools. And it was unfortunate, sir, because I remember as a child coming up where there were even police coming into the school, counselors coming into the school and doing sessions with us and talking about various types of substances.
Dear program.
That too, sir. Where young people were introduced to these substances, they were told about their dangers, they were told about the effects. And to know that the last administration, in its haste to perhaps cut expenditure, could find wisdom in cutting these types of programs, sir, is really unfortunate. I mean, when they could stay in this chamber and other places and speak to the fact of the increase in crime, the increase in substance abuse, but not speak to the fact that they had actually cut a number of these programs, which would arm young people with the information necessary to make wise choices, is very unfortunate, sir. And I have had the opportunity to meet with NCSA and to agree with them that those programs will now start back within our primary and our secondary schools. I've asked them to accelerate the programs because I believe that we have to ensure that we protect the youngest in our society. Fortunate for us, this legislation also allows for us to ensure that there are safeguards in relation to the age limits for minors. Minors are therefore not to be captured under this unless the person requires it for a prescription for medicinal use. And sir, again, that obviously has its appropriate regulation that will be done in relation to the use of cannabis by our young people. But the wider difficulty and the challenge that we will have, sir, is one which the member for St. Philip South would have indicated and when he first addressed us in this debate and indicated that an extensive public relations program would be put in place to educate the population about medicinal cannabis, but also generally in relation to the use of marijuana and even the abuse of any substance, whether it be marijuana or any other substance. So I hope that the honourable member for St. Michael West, appreciates that this administration is not going to just introduce this legislation and leave it there. We accept that some damage has been done, and we understand that we have to also put some funds into ensuring that whether it is at the level of the schools, whether it is at the level of the Ministry of Health, whether it is generally in relation to public communications, that we have to communicate to our young people the distinction between utilizing the plant for medicinal use and also going to the route of substance abuse as well. Because, sir, the fact is that our young people are well aware, whether it is in the listening to music, they hear the references to cannabis and to marijuana, sir. We can't escape it. But what we must do is to arm them with the information, as the Honourable Leader would have said earlier, that if you are an athlete, it isn't going to work in terms of being able to smoke or to use cannabis and be able to be as fast as you would want to be. And equally, sir, we also have to be mindful, because I remember when I was a couple years ago, when I was a student at Barbados Community College, being part of an environmental and anti-narcotic group called Envision with one of the senators in the other place, sir. And I recall we used to go into primary schools in particular, speaking to young people about the use of substances and substance abuse generally. We used to speak about marijuana, we used to speak about tobacco, and we used to speak about cocaine. And I remember back then doing a lot of work in relation to explaining to them the need to be able to stay away from certain substances when they were young. Sir, I think we all accept that we don't want our young people using these substances under the age of consent. Sir, I see you are pointing to the clock, but I think we recognize that. I think the legislation protects that. I think respective ministries know what we have to do in relation to ensuring that we continue to protect the youngest in our society and to protect the young minds, sir. And I believe that we are all committed to the cause in terms of ensuring that the appropriate education is put out there for the wider public, but in particular for our young people. So, sir, with that, I want to again commend all who have worked on this particular bill. I know the Attorney General, the Minister for Agriculture, Minister for Health, and all those who were on the committee worked tirelessly to be able to make contributions to this piece of legislation. And sir, while the regulations have not come, I heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael West speak to regulations. Well, I've been here not as long as him, but I'm well aware that I have not seen regulations come for a lot of matters. That, truth be told, regulations often come after, as people fine-tune respective pieces of legislation. So I think it is particularly unfortunate and misleading that he would make the claim as though we are trying to hide something or that we haven't brought something that we should have. I think it would be good practice, but I think with something like this where it is a developmental industry, I think we have to take our time and make sure that we pull from different territories to ensure that we have something that is watertight as well, sir. I have every confidence in my colleagues and those in the technical arena to ensure that they will get this piece of legislation and its appropriate regulations correct in the fullness of time. With those few words, sir, I thank you.
Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I suppose honored at having been invited by my colleagues on the front bench and my colleagues on the back bench to wrap up this debate. Let me thank at the outset the members of Parliament who have contributed with their wisdom and intellect and good judgment to the debate on this bill and to the debate on this report. I'd like also to echo the words of gratitude of the member for the city when he thanked all of the individuals who participated in the work of the Select Committee as we sought to try to improve this bill. Mr. Speaker, much has been said, and I am loath to go over or to repeat any of the areas that were so ably canvassed and covered by my colleagues, and to the extent that I may happen to do so, it is perhaps only for the purpose of further explanation or for emphasis. Let me say that the matter of, well, in respect of the reply of the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the Leader of the Opposition struggled mightily to find anything wrong with this bill. And I sympathize with him because his conscience, of course, compelled him to say at the outset that he supported the use of medicinal cannabis. That's a good starting point, sir, because it means that at least on the fundamentals we are likely to agree. But what we can almost always expect, sir, is that in any environment there will be disagreement on matters of implementation, there will be disagreement on some matters of policy, there'll be disagreement on so many things. But so long, Mr. Speaker, as we can agree on the principle, on the fundamental, that we should not shy away from making cannabis available to the Barbadian public for medicinal purposes, sir, then I really don't think we have an issue. We may fuss, we may quarrel, we may fight on whether or not the regulations come now or if they come later. Mr. Speaker, we may fight, we may quarrel on whether or not we should have therapeutic facilities or whether we should only have dyed-in-the-wool medical clinics. But at the end of it all, sir, the central theme of this bill is to do nothing more or less than to achieve two important symbiotic goals. The Leader of the Opposition speaks about them as if they're mutually exclusive. He speaks as though we should not pursue a medicinal cannabis industry because for some perverse reasoning it would serve to weaken a medicinal industry, a medicinal approach. Or on the other hand,
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The honourable member is misleading us, I'm sure unintentionally. Twice said no, that I have suggested that these two objectives are mutually exclusive. That is absolutely not correct. I have said the bill is supposed to be seeking to establish a medicinal cannabis industry and catering to health sector related issues, treatment of people with ailments. Yet the thrust of the presentations today have suggested that the primary concern is about making money. That's true.
Continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish to reiterate, because I interpreted the member's argument in one way, and he can't tell me how to interpret it. He can say what he meant, but I interpreted it the way that I felt is a reasonable and rational interpretation. Because he seemed to suggest, the honourable member seemed to suggest, that we ought to either highlight one or the other. No, sir. The good thing is that the Barbados Labour Party is in government. And in the pursuit of the ideal of making medicinal cannabis available to Barbadians, we feel it is important as well, and at the same time, to seize the opportunity to get involved in the industry. You see, sir, I do not know, but I would bet that hundreds of thousands of aspirin are sold in Barbados every year. We don't make one. Hundreds of thousands of ibuprofen. I don't even think there's any point in going into the minutiae of the list. Because we, as a consumer-driven society, have for the most part been content to take from others without, sir, trying to find an opportunity to produce for ourselves. Sir, I support the approach of providing medicinal cannabis using the intellect, the might, the hands and hearts of Barbadians who are willing to get involved in the industry. That, sir, is a noble quest and one that we should not run from. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member suggested, why would the Canadians want to come here? They can produce it cheaper in Colombia for 5 cents a gram, while in Canada is $100 something a gram. Sir, the honourable member forgets. And I believe that even now it is correct to say that Barbados is the 3rd largest destination of Canadian foreign direct investment. And there's a reason for it, sir. Because we have similar legal systems. Mr. Speaker, we have a treaty-based arrangement. We have a history. We have a history, sir. And I can't go anywhere with the honourable member at all if he's going to feel that he should poo-poo the interest of Canadian enterprises coming to Barbados. We support Barbadian industry and Barbadian enterprise, sir. And we would be fools, sir, for those who remember Shakespeare, I think it is Julius Caesar, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, when taken at the flood, leads upward. Simple concept, sir. Simple concept. But the honourable member would prefer us to be cautious, not to do, no matter how noble the cause, and hope that another tide will come. Mr. Speaker, I was elected last year to serve a single term in Parliament, not to serve 2, not to serve 3. My constituents, sir, want economic enfranchisement. They want the best of medical attention. They want the best that this world has to offer. I do not have time, Mr. Speaker, to wait and hope that there's another tide. That's what the last government did. And the tide that came washed them out. Mr. Speaker, a select committee is a wonderful thing. And perhaps the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is sometimes so in contest with the members on this side that a little conversation could work wonders. Now, the Leader of the Opposition called for a select committee. We had already determined that we were going to go to select committee. Now, Mr. Speaker, but let us assume that for some reason the government caved and that we were going to be resolute and not go to select committee, but because of the prevailing view of Leader of the Opposition, we went to select committee. The point is, sir, that we did. It is the most recent of 4 select committee hearings of this government. So far for this term, a term of less than 18 months, sir, we have gone to select committee on no fewer than 4 occasions in the last decade. The last administration went to select committee once. The honourable member must not believe that we on this side are afraid of the people who elected us. On every single important piece of legislation, as a matter of principle, we meet with stakeholders, sir. The select committee provided further opportunity to hear the views of those stakeholders. And I believe that what we have got out of the process, Mr. Speaker, is a better bill than the one that we put in. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's not a defeat. That's not a defeat. I don't count that as a loss. No, sir. It can't be a loss. Because the terms of reference of the select committee was that we would engage with stakeholders and interest groups and with the public for the purpose of producing a better bill. And in that regard, I believe that we've been successful. Now, sir, listening to the people who we serve is important. But listening with a view, Mr. Speaker, of actually embracing the comments is what determines whether you are a good government or not. People listen because they have ears. Other people listen with a view to taking steps to carry those thoughts that have been expressed into action. Now, Mr. Speaker, it isn't everything, it isn't every policy position that we would have been minded to change. But we changed many of them. We changed many of them because we heard the voices of the people. But, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition felt so hard done by that his only offering to this chamber is that we should be cautious. Now, I believe I knew a few more words than 4 or 5. And of those 4 or 5, sir, I probably know the meaning of maybe half. Now, there is a difference between caution and acting carefully. Now, the Leader of the Opposition would have preferred us to fold up this report, walk out of this chamber, and do what? He hasn't said. He has not said. We have already exercised care and attention because we have incorporated many of the criticisms, we've accommodated many of the criticisms that were made in the bill. So we've done what he's asking for. But now he wants us to be even more cautious still. But he doesn't say, and do what? To what end? You know, Mr. Speaker, the science of aspirin was not determined until the 1800s, I believe. But long before the 1800s, thousands of years before the 1800s, people were sucking on a bark of a tree called a willow tree, I believe, so as to be free of pain. They did not have the benefit, sir, of Purdue farmers spending hundreds of millions of dollars to determine if it worked and how it worked. They didn't have the benefit of Novartis or any of the other major pharmaceutical companies spending vast billions of dollars in research to determine if it worked and how it worked. Sir, 2,000 years ago, people knew that by sucking on the bark of a willow tree, it stopped them from feeling pain. Stopped them from feeling pain. They had no FDA then, sir. And I, like the member for St. Peter, I was blessed by a country upbringing that saw me drinking bush tea. Sometimes I think it was just bush tea because we hadn't had a kind of tea to drink. You had no proper tea in the morning, so you get bush tea, pear leaf tea, all kind of, as long as it had a leaf, sir. As long as it had a leaf, you drink it. And you know what, sir, I think that my grandparents, who used to force me to drink it, probably covered up the fact that they had no property by telling you, sonny, it's good for you. Good for what? I cannot say. But what we can be sure of is that none of us met our demise. Now, sir, we have this thing called cannabis. It has been studied and studied and studied again. But I'd like to remind members of this chamber that many years ago, when the idea of regional integration and the freedom of movement of people was being worked on, a man named Honourable said that what they were then discussing in rooms as a nice theoretical idea was something that vendors and higglers had been living across the region as they got on boats and bring bananas and guavas and oranges and did their trade within the region without let or hindrance. But it took some big brain people to call it regional integration and try to give it structure. Now, sir, even the big brain people have spoken on the issue of medicinal cannabis. They have spoken on the issue of medicinal cannabis. My friend, the leader of the opposition, sought to find every negative in the report. But you know, I've read the same report. I was at all the meetings that he was at. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know. I don't see those negatives when I read. I saw Dr. Harley Mosley say, and I mean, I don't want to take up my time quoting, but I believe it's worth referring to it, Mr. Speaker. But Dr. Harley Mosley spoke and said quite clearly that cannabis was not dangerous and that it has significant medicinal value. I'm paraphrasing him. The disabilities, the Barbados Council for the Disabilities, sir, the people who are affected by it, they said in their memorandum, many persons with disabilities live with chronic pain, spasms, and seizures. Medical research has shown that these situations can be greatly improved, and they went on to support this bill, sir. Person after person after person. ICAR took the view that there really wasn't any need for a bill at all, that we should just go straight and liberalize the use of cannabis. Rasimba, who spoke on behalf of his organization, he said the same thing. A gentleman named Paul Gibson came and said words that sound remarkably like the words of the leader of the opposition. Be cautious. Be cautious. Sir, we've been cautious. We've produced a bill that we feel can work. We've produced a bill, sir, that takes into account, in our view, the requirements of the medical profession. Now, the leader of the opposition, I really think he's trying to be a little bit unfair when he continues to harp on this idea that this whole structure is resident in the house of the minister or the Ministry of Agriculture. Yes, it is. But so what? It has to be resident somewhere. It has to be resident somewhere, sir. We have a single bill that in part of it, it deals with the cannabis industry as an agricultural product. As an agricultural product, sir. I wonder if we were able to extract some nice medicament out of sugarcane, some nice medicinal extract out of sugarcane, if the learned gentleman will be saying, move that from the Ministry of Agriculture here, you got to put that health. What are we about, sir? We do not get in here and divide up government in those kinds of impractical ways. The bill clearly recognizes that the role of the Minister of Health is paramount and unassailable. That's what it does. On any matters relating to prescription, it defers to the Pharmacy Act. On matters relating to writing the prescriptions, it defers to the doctors. That's what it does. So we could just as well have said, okay, we can go with the leader of the opposition and move the whole thing into health, and then we'd have the silliness of having the Minister of Health preside over agriculture. Sir, we can go too far. We are satisfied, sir, that the professionals who will interface with this bill are satisfied that the roles and responsibilities of the Minister of Health are not usurped in any way, and that is what is important. Mr. Speaker, there's an element of the Charities Act. The Charities Act is administered by the member for St. Michael North. It is. But you know what? Part of the Charities Act says that any time the director, the person in charge of these charities, wants to procure certain information, she has to get permission from the Attorney General. This is how we work every day. This is how we work every day. Import licenses, sir, imports are under one ministry, largely under the Ministry of Finance, but import licenses come from the Ministry of Small Business. That's how government works. Perhaps the Honourable Member of the Opposition has been away from it for so long that he's forgotten that we don't divide up government in that way. I mean, it's impossible to work that way. So, sir, those scaremongering tactics really will appeal to a different audience. But I don't think it will appeal to an audience that has a serious view to medical needs. Mr. Speaker, the health professionals may have an issue. PAWI has an issue. Everybody has an issue. But you know what, sir? There was a famous legal jurisprudential scholar who, I don't remember his name, but I remember that he was of the school that we call the School of American Realism. And the School of American Realism basically said that as you structure your affairs in law and government, you should structure them in such a way as to minimize friction and waste. That's all. Structure your affairs in such a way as to minimize friction and waste. That's the School of American Realism. And where does that take you? Do what you have to do. Sit with who you have to sit with, negotiate, give ground where you need to give ground, but end up with a product that we can all work with for the benefit of the people you serve. Now, Mr. Speaker, before my time runs out, let me just deal with this issue of what is in it for the Bajans. Because I get the feeling that the leader of the opposition is not satisfied that there is any adequate opportunity for Barbadians to be involved in this industry. Now, sir, we've done two things. The fundamental position is that any license that is to be issued under this act is open to any Bajan at all. Anyone. Okay? So regardless of what area of medicinal cannabis you're going to be operating in, licenses are available for Bajans. Now, sir, I am reminded of this thing called Kelmanomics that used to dominate that end of the front bench up until a year what it was, but there was a peculiar mathematics which suggested that half was more than something like that. I don't remember what it was. That 20% was more. Some bizarre notion, sir. Now, in an environment where we put a stipulation in place that says any Bajan can own all, I don't understand how the member is getting hung up on an environment where we say in certain circumstances you must own 30%. Don't understand it. Because if the law that we had crafted said only that for a Bajan to get involved in any of this, he could only earn 30%, I would understand. I would understand. But you know what? Again, my learned friend, his memory is a little convenient. Or he chooses not to accept the reality, sir. You know, Mr. Speaker, when you are in government, government is not about looking at things through rose-tinted glasses. Government is not about wild imaginings. We cannot come into government and make assumptions that everything will go the way that we want it to go. Now, let's be practical, sir. One of these licenses is called a research and development license. Now, I believe the honourable member, leading the opposition, doesn't think that we did our research, but we've had study tours, went to other jurisdictions. I mean, we really put a lot into it even before we began to draft, so that we know what Jamaica did, we know what St. Vincent does, we know what Antigua does. Now, sir, if the leader of the opposition would trouble to ask himself or do a little research about the budgets that research and development companies have, he would discover, sir, that the major companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes researching a single drug, which may not even pass, and all of that money has gone down the drain. The setting up of the laboratory alone can cost many millions of dollars. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me remind the leader of the opposition that when he was last in cabinet, under a Barbados Labour Party administration, those were his glory days, sir. And long may they reign. And long may he remember them. I believe he longs for them still. Mr. Speaker, we had to liberalize our telecommunications sector. And we had to make some choices. What was that choice, sir? Whether on something as important as telecoms, we were prepared in a new century to allow a foreign company to come in here and own 100% of our telecommunications industry. And you know what? The cabinet that, I can't say that he was in, because I don't think he was in cabinet at that time, but the cabinet that the leader of the opposition then supported, that cabinet took a stance that for a telecommunications company to get a telecommunications license, 25% of the company had to be owned by Barbadians. I didn't hear the leader of the opposition squawking then. He didn't squawk then, sir. The cabinet of the parliament that he was a part of said any telecommunications company getting a license, 25% of it had to be owned by Bajans.
Honourable Member, Mr. Michael West.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable, a very learned Attorney General, members